welcome to our July executive meeting. I'm sure there'll be one or two sore heads this morning, and after 58 years since we've won a major tournament, we'll look forward to the next two, and with hope and excitement that maybe we'll get there one day. It's just a reminder that it's only executive lead members present in the room that are taking the decisions at this meeting. Others in attendance are here to provide advice. We have no planned fire drills today. In the event of a fire alarm, please follow the fire exit signs, congregate in the car park, and if anybody present might need assistance, please inform a member of Democratic Services. The agenda and papers have been published on the council website in advance of the meeting. The council recognises the importance of striking a balance between providing opportunity for lawful expression of views and unacceptable behaviours or actions which cause disruption, which can lead to our meeting being adjourned. The council will be making a recording of the meeting, and this will be published in due course. So today's meeting will be run using a hybrid format. The executive lead members and key officers are physically present in the room here at Dean House, but other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or just to observe. And the meeting is being broadcast, and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. In terms of hybrid good practice, please can you only use the meeting chat for the meeting purposes of this meeting. Primarily to get my attention, but I prefer hands up because it's easier to work while I'm chairing the meeting with seeing your hands up on the screen. If possible, please say your name before speaking. Otherwise, please ensure that microphones and cameras are turned off when not speaking. Mr. Clark, would you like to turn your camera off, please? As we have a nice big picture of you in the room. It is though simultaneously quite entertaining and intimidating. We have apologies for absence from one executive lead member, Sarah Wakefield, who is online. Please note that Councillor Adam Dance has stepped down from the executive following his election to Parliament. Am I seeing any other apologies, please? Please also note that we have apologies from Claire Winter, and Richard Selwyn is stepping in off the subs bench, which will be an interesting after last night's subs performance. We'll look forward to the performance today. So we've got our minutes from the 5th of June. Does anybody have any issues or anything they would wish to correct on those minutes? I'm not seeing anything. Can I have a proposer in favour, please? Councillor Wilkins, secondly Councillor Lishon. Those in favour of accepting those minutes, those against, that's clearly carried. And are there any declarations of interest in today's agenda other than those posted in advance relating to membership of city, town and parish councils? No, not seeing any. And public question time. I've not been advised of any public questions. Is that still the case? That's still the case, so no public questions today. Okay, so executive forward plan. I formally move as published. Are there any comments or questions on that? It's an item for notes. Not seeing anything from lead members or executive lead members. Anything from anybody else in the room? No, not seeing anything. Which brings us on to item 6, if only meetings move so quickly. Normally, the council tax reduction scheme review consultation, and I'd like to call on Councillor Liz Lishon to introduce the item. Good morning, Liz.
Morning, Chair, and thank you. I think we will slow down now. We have got ahead of us a very complex paper. And I'm sorry that we're in a position whereby we need to consult again on council tax reduction scheme. That is the part that is for working age residents, the rules for those of pension age being set by government. So the reason this consultation must come forward so far in advance of the next budget setting is that the scheme has to be agreed by the end of this calendar year in order to comply with the billing timetable for 25-26. So as an administration, we were pleased to be able to bring forward a banding scheme for the whole of Somerset that both better served households on low incomes, and reduce the amount of work for officers who had been in places chasing very small amounts of unpaid council tax. However, when setting the scheme for the current financial year, which was increased by the DWP rate on inflation, we agreed to fully review the scheme for the following year, so for 25-26, and that's where we are today. We need to look at every option possible for a more viable council, so a more financially sustainable council. We're looking today to agree the commencement, the timetable and the questions of the consultation. We are not taking decisions today on where the CTRS, our reduction scheme, may be made. That is for the consultation period to play out before we get to that stage. I'm looking now to hand over to Richard Seeley to give us some more detail. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Richard very much for his excellent work over the last years, but also before that at Somerset West and Taunton, his immaculate papers, and also to welcome Sean Warren, who has recently been appointed to this very position in the life of this council. So if I may, I'll hand over to Richard, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leyshon, and morning, everybody. I have to say I can't take all the credit for this. Actually, this is very much a collective team effort from within the Revenues and Benefits Service. And I'm also joined today actually by David Airy, who is an independent Revenues and Benefits expert and consultant who's worked with us to actually develop this in conjunction with the consultation team as well. Sean unfortunately can't join us today, but I'm hopeful we'll be able to join future meetings in relation to this. I'll just give a very quick overview, if I may, as to the background to this and how we've got to the recommendations that are detailed in the report in front of you. Obviously, what this paper does essentially is details a proposed set of consultation questions on a proposed revised council tax reduction scheme for next year, the 25-26 financial year. The paper sets out the approach that we've taken to identifying the areas of the scheme that we potentially need to change. As part of that, it outlines the potential financial impact and, bluntly, the savings that could be made by making those changes. I must caveat that the savings are very much estimates. So, and they're based on information from one of the four area systems that we run, extrapolated across the other areas. The paper also includes a couple of equalities impact assessments. So there's a detailed impact assessment that looks at the actual consultation approach. There is then a high level impact assessment that looks at the actual proposed changes that are being suggested in the paper. And obviously the recommendation, as Councillor Leyshon has mentioned, is that the executive agree to the consultation. Some background in terms of what we need to do here in law. We are required as a council each year to agree a council tax reduction scheme for the following year. In practice, we need to agree that by December in order to give us time to implement any changes for the coming year. We're not required necessarily to change the scheme if we don't want to. However, as members will recall from the meeting in December last year, when you agreed the scheme for the current year, you also agreed a recommendation to actually fully review the scheme during this year. That recommendation was very much driven by the financial emergency and the need to look to find saving. Obviously, if we want to make any significant changes to the scheme, we're required by law to actually undertake a full public consultation exercise. And that exercise, essentially, we can't consult on options. We actually have to propose in law a specific scheme that we'd be putting forward, hence the consultation exercise that is recommended in the paper. However, it's important to stress that actually at this point, you're not making any decisions. That comes later, and in the autumn, the late autumn, following the consultation, an actual proposed scheme will be brought back before
Richard,
members.
could I just put you on pause for a second? We've got full reception reporting from members at home. I'm not quite sure whether it's you or them or us. Let's have a go.
Okay.
Bill, it sounds like it's your end because we've all got it.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. Can you hear me fine?
I can hear you okay, but not
Okay,
the speaker.
we've just rearranged the speaker's microphone, and hopefully that'll improve the reception at your end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is that any better?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So I was just saying, obviously, at this point, important to emphasise you're not making any decisions. That comes later. Obviously, as I've said, we've framed the consultation and the proposed changes in a way that would maximise our opportunity, essentially, to potentially make savings out of the scheme. Again, obviously with the financial emergency in mind. In terms of specifically how we've identified those areas, we've actually undertaken a detailed exercise to actually look at how our existing scheme compares against other councils. And the councils that we've looked at are those that are defined as being in our family group. And I think we've used the LG Futures definition there of our family group. We've also looked at councils who have had to serve Section 114 notices. And we've looked at other councils in the local geographic area who run banded schemes. Now, we've detailed in the report at Appendix 4 a summary of the findings from that exercise. Essentially, what that has demonstrated from reviewing that data is that whilst our scheme is generous at the headline level, the fact we pay out 100%, we're actually less generous when you're actually starting to look at the detail of the scheme and how we sort of do things beneath the lid, essentially. And interestingly, actually, we already spend, as a proportion of our council tax gross debit, significantly less on the CTR scheme than other authorities that have actually served Section 114 notices. So we've, in terms of identifying areas of the scheme to actually focus on changing, we've broadly focused those on the elements of the scheme where we're currently more generous on average than the other councils that we've looked at. And as you'll see from the consultation pack, essentially we've come up with a fairly wide range of areas or changes we could potentially look at. So those include looking at reducing the maximum amount that we currently pay out under the scheme, introducing a deduction for any non-dependents living in claimants' households, removing the £25 per week earnings disregard, restricting the level of support that we provide to the band D maximum. We've also looked more generally at removing quite a number of other income disregards. And I would obviously flag the fact, as it does in the report, that this actually includes disregards for people with disabilities. And finally, we've also looked at actually restricting how far we backdate claims. We currently backdate 12 months. We could backdate for a much shorter period, and I think the suggestion is potentially 1 month. So as I mentioned earlier, we've actually attempted to map the financial impact of those changes if we were to introduce them. Again, I'd flag the fact that actually they're very much estimates. In total, if we implemented all of these changes, we could reduce the spend on the working age scheme by something in the region of 76% or £12 million and roughly a £15 million scheme. But obviously, you know, if we were to make that level of cuts, I think it's fair to say that, you know, that is likely to result in significant hardship and actually probably would be counterproductive because it would simply drive up arrears and we'd have to use additional resource essentially to then chase debt. The work to actually understand in detail the impacts of this is actually still ongoing. We will be bringing this, or the actual consultation proposals that are agreed today, to scrutiny on the 28th of August and asking scrutiny to comment on the consultation questions. To support that, we will be bringing more detailed work which will attempt to actually map the impact potentially of those if we were to introduce those changes. And we'll also provide information about actually the you know, what's happened during the past year with the new scheme that we introduced on the 1st of April. And as is mentioned earlier on, we've worked closely with our external expert, with our consultation team internally, and with our equalities officer to develop the consultation. When we go live with the consultation, you know, we've developed a fully detailed communications plan to make sure that we broadcast this as far and wide as possible to people that are interested. That will include writing specifically to all existing working age claimants. So that's the background. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Richard, and thank you to all of your team for the hard work on this. I think a lot of this underlines for me that council tax become a very unfair tax. You know, it was introduced on the back of the failure of the poll tax or community charge. We're paying a tax based on people's property values in 1992. That is not a sustainable way forwards for councils, particularly to fund the significant proportion of social care. And I think it underlines the broken model of local government finance that we have. I particularly noted your comments around this potentially causing significant hardship and potentially being counterproductive in some elements. And I do welcome those thoughts. But also I welcome that you put all options on the table for us to look at for consultation and then to look at decision making at the appropriate time during the year. Okay, do I see any lead members or associate lead members wishing to speak? Theo.
Thank you very much, Chair. You've obviously stolen an awful lot of what I was about to say at the start, but there we go. I'll cross those bits off. Council tax, as we all know, is a fundamentally unfair and unsustainable way of funding local government. But until we get a government which will have the foresight and courage to do something different, and I've no idea whether the new government will do that, no particular reason to believe that they will, I hope they will. We have to try and make it as fair as we possibly can. And that is what we have clearly been doing in Somerset over the last few years. The council tax reduction scheme we have, I think, is fundamentally well structured, although, as has been referenced, it is perhaps not as generous as we might like to think it is. I understand that because of the financial emergency we face, we have to look at all the options that there are. But within the proposals that we have in front of us today, and I accept that this is just a consultation, there are certain things which I am, to put it mildly, deeply uncomfortable with. There are certain things which I think actually, for me, would be where I would draw a line at exploring all avenues and say, well, we've explored them, but we're not prepared to go down them. And I think today might be the time when we have to do that. In particular, I am deeply uncomfortable with the proposals to remove the disregards for disabled people and carers. I think the idea that we are going to try and balance our budgetary difficulties off the backs of disabled peoples and carers is something that I do not think I can countenance. It's just wrong to my point of view, and particularly when you consider the context for the whole of this scheme. Whilst we like to talk about it being generous, and there are some generous elements to it, we talk about how generous it is to give people 100% discount on council tax, which is becoming more normal. We know that. I mean, we may have been ahead of the game with it, but it's not actually as exceptional as we might like to think. Fortunately, it shouldn't be exceptional. It should be the norm. But to qualify for 100% discount, not taking account of disregards for the time being, as a two-parent family, two adults and 2 kids, your income would be less than £15,000 a year. And I would be surprised if there was anyone in this room today who is attempting to support 2 kids and another adult on less than £15,000 a year. So it really isn't as generous as all that. And in that context, the idea that we should take away the disregards for disabled people and carers is something I'm not really prepared to consider, and therefore I think it would be, broadly speaking, disingenuous for us to consult on it if it's not something we're prepared to see happen. And I would expand that to all of the disregards included in part 5 of the consultation on page 48. So the disability and carers benefits, the child-related income, child benefit, child maintenance, and the housing related income. And the key point here is that a lot of these things, the interplay between them is if you remove one of them, it really starts to make very little sense not to remove all of them. And I think we should remove all of them. I think we should stop trying to persuade ourselves that we are more generous than we ought to be, and accept that these are lines that we should not cross. And whilst we're on the subject, I would also remove part 5, which is the disregard of £25 a week from earnings, which would, if we don't remove that, will take away the incentive to work that is referenced, and actually be a penalty to work. I have a couple more things to say, but I see that the lead member of finance is waving at me, so I don't know if she wants to interrupt at this point.
I think you referenced part 5 when you meant to reference part 3.
I apologise.
I think
so.
that
It's
was...
part 3 on page 46 and part 5 on page 48. Fundamentally, the thing I would add, the one point I want to make on top of this, is that although hypothetically it's possible that all of these changes in front of us could take £12 million off the bill, firstly, that money is being spent for a reason. It is because these people cannot afford to pay council tax. And secondly, because of that very reason, we can write down whatever we want people are required to pay us. But if they've not got the money, they're not going to pay us, and then we'll spend time and money chasing them for money that they don't have, because they're living off £15,000 a year, or whatever the particular circumstances are. And actually paying for food and heating is far more important than paying your council tax. I'm not going to argue with anyone who makes that decision. And then we're going to go spend valuable time and money chasing them for money that they haven't got. And fundamentally, as colleagues have heard me say many, many times before, we're here to make people's lives better. And chasing people for money they haven't got because they're choosing to spend their money on feeding their kids isn't making people's lives better. So I would like to take those 2 elements of the consultation out and not even consider doing them.
Okay, thank you. Federica Smith-Roberts next. Good morning, Fed.
Morning, Chair. I just wanted to speak in support of what Theo has raised today. I would again be deeply uncomfortable myself, in particular if we went out to consultation, especially on part 5. I understand that we want to be open and transparent and demonstrate to people that we are showing all options. But for myself, these are a red line, and that I wouldn't, if it came back to here in a few months' time, wouldn't be able to support if it was proposed that we were going to take this action against those that receive this money to support themselves, just going about their everyday life. It's not going above and beyond, it's trying to give them equality when it comes to the disability and carer benefits. For the child-related income, that's to go to the children to try and or the parents to spend on the children, and a lot of the time on the incomes that we've heard Theo mention. This is literally about putting food on the table, and even at those times people are struggling and having to use food banks. So fully support what Theo has raised today.
Okay, Richard.
Fundamentally, I totally agree what I've heard from Councillor Sia Butt-Phillips and Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts. However, I would like to understand the implications of removing those lines from this document. I don't know whether anybody could give me an idea of what that would look like.
Pass on to Richard.
Yeah, certainly happy to help with that, Chair. Essentially, we've tried to give you an indication in Appendix 5, which sets out the and I again stress, estimated savings that you could deliver from the various options. So, and apologies because Appendix 5 doesn't actually line up with the way that the questions are framed in the consultation document. But essentially removing the income disregards, which I think is part 5 in the consultation document, is shown as option H in Appendix 5. So essentially that that removes the ability to deliver up to say £9 million worth of savings there. The earned incomes disregard, which is part 3, I believe, in the consultation document, is 753,000.
Hey, Heather, next, please. Good morning.
I hope this is close enough for people to hear at home. Thank you. I mean, I agree entirely. We do not want to be putting any of these things on the table. Nobody would want to be considering any of these reductions. We were very pleased, I think, with the council tax reduction scheme that we created that's in force this year and last year. So I think we can all say that, and I've got absolute sympathy with some of the views being expressed. I guess one of the questions I've got, and thank you, Richard, for asking my first question, which is about what the financial implications might be. The second question was, I think in the past I've been aware that in order to receive some of our capitalisation directive and flexibility, there's been a kind of not an expectation, but a gratitude or an acknowledgement from the government that our council tax reduction scheme has been in place to be supportive, quite rightly. So I just wondered, again, from that perspective, are there any consequences to any to us taking any of these things out or leaving them in? Would they be frowned upon, looked upon as good, bad? I don't know whether the whole council tax reduction scheme in its entirety was what the government liked, or what they just liked some issue of. It's a bit of a tricky one to ask, but I'd appreciate hearing that one. I also have some sympathy with the view that actually there's a kind of getting out there to the wider public what our financial situation means. So, I'm very conflicted about whether we should go out with all of these ideas, understanding that we have no desire to do most of them, but to actually help people understand what the enormity might be. But I'm listening to the debate, and we'll make a decision when we get to the position of voting. But if I could ask the question, please, about the government's response to any changes we might make or not make.
Mr. Vaughan.
Yep. So in terms of there isn't a policy on it as such, it was certainly a key issue they raised, particularly in relation to us requesting an additional 5% on council tax. In terms of those authorities that are in financial trouble, as it were, I'm aware Croydon had to increase the amount of its scheme and actually improved it. I think that reflects the fact they've also increased the council tax. So it's not a set criteria as such, but it was certainly a question they asked us and wanted to understand our scheme. We were in the position that we did have a modern scheme which helped, but it is something they were taking into account, I would suggest, in terms of requests for future council tax increases.
Good morning, Dixie.
Thanks. I accept where Theo and Federica are coming from, because I think it's not just kind of moral issue. There's also a kind of a fiscal reason for not penalising those who would struggle to pay. Kind of picking up on Heather's point, I know that further down the agenda, we've got our review and adoption of the productivity plan, agenda item 9. And I know that on that, the last section is our ask of government, which the previous government has invited us forward. And I know that financial support for council tax reductions is a kind of a key request on there that would make a big difference, because it would mean that our most vulnerable residents were supported while we were having to make savings. So my kind of question is, in the event, it's kind of quite a difficult thing that we have to make decisions so far in advance.
Excuse me, the sound is really bad again. I'm to apologise. The sound is really bad.
Is that right? Is that better?
It is a bit better, yeah.
Better. Sorry, I'm quite shouty and I'm right next to the microphone. I can do much
No,
more.
I think it's your microphone. It's definitely it's a bit bitty. Sorry.
Right, I'll try a different one. Is that any better?
Yes, that sounds better.
Okay, cool. So yes, what I was saying is it's quite difficult that we have to work so far in advance setting our council tax. In the probably unlikely event that we were going to get some government support, could we kind of change tack? And, you know, whatever we decide after this consultation, we presumably don't have to consult to be more generous, if you know what I mean. So I'm just sort of wondering about the degree of flexibility in there.
The law requires that we consult on significant changes, but broadly speaking, yes, if this doesn't commit you to any decisions at this point. So you can essentially, I think, when we come to agree a final scheme in the autumn, you can safely design within this. And if actually in doing so, you're actually being more generous in practice, we would be able to do that.
Not seeing any other. Oh, sorry, Councillor Randall Green. Joe.
With regard to the consultation, how do we make sure that this gets to the people who really need to see it, those who will benefit from it? And also, turkeys aren't going to vote for Christmas, and the people who are going to be consulted on who will be affected by this are not going to say that they would like us to increase the council tax. How can we make sure that we have a fair consultation and that we can make a decision based on really good information when it comes back, please?
So our intention is to actually write specifically to obviously all of the working age claimants that are affected by this, but more generally we will also publicise the consultation. So we'll do press releases. We're also going to contact as well as many organisations as we can that clearly have an interest in this. So organisations such as Citizens Advice, housing associations, also local town and parish councils, to try and essentially get the message out there as wide as possible that we're running this consultation exercise, which will run over a 10-week period to maximise the amount of time people have got to respond, and basically to encourage people to actually respond to us on it.
Thank you, Richard. Jason would like to add to that.
Yeah, there's also a legal requirement on us to consult the other major preceptors who are impacted on this scheme. So this scheme does affect those other bodies as well. So we would consult with them formally as well as part of this process.
Okay, I'll go to Sarah Wakefield online as a member of the executives. Good morning, Sarah.
Yeah, good morning. Hope you can all hear me properly. I've listened to what's been said, and I agree with many of my colleagues about how reluctant we would be to make any changes to those least able to pay council tax that would affect them adversely. I think to do the exercise properly, however, it may be necessary to put all the potential options forward so that people can see we are doing the exercise properly, and also the nature of what we're trying to deal with as a council, which is to stay afloat if we possibly can, so that some of the horrible decisions that we've had to already make that we don't like. So I just think that if we were going to go ahead with the proposed consultation paper, it should be made very, very clear in the covering letter that this does not mean we will necessarily implement them, and as a council we're very reluctant to make the position of people in poverty worse. In fact, we would not want to do that at all. So as long as that is covered so that people don't start to panic immediately, I think the consultation should go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I was just going to remind members, you did take a paper to executive in April, which set out the financial strategy we're heading towards for the year. That paper made an assumption that from CTRS scheme and this consultation and a piece of work at the end of the calendar year, that we'd be saving somewhere in the range between £1 and £5 million. So obviously, if the proposal to take out the elements from consultation that have just been mentioned go through, you're reducing the potential saving from CTRS to less than £2 million in total. And as Richard's just outlined, you will not be able to change that. If you don't consult on elements, you cannot decide to implement them later. And obviously, the point of consultation is, and you don't know what everyone else said, because we haven't asked that question. So whilst that's still technically, if members took all the other savings that were available after the consultation, that would be less than £2 million. That's still technically in the range of 1 to 5. The reason we had a range is we don't know what all of those figures look like, so we're working them through as we are exactly today on this paper to nail down the figures, but it just puts more pressure on all the other elements of that scheme. The last thing I was just going to mention, I think the comparison with Section 114 authorities, whilst useful, should be borne in mind. Lots of those authorities did increase their council tax reduction schemes in terms of the generosity of them after they put significant increases, or as they put significant increases onto council tax. And I think that was where the government focus was. The government focus was saying, if we're going to let you put council tax up by more than X%, we want to make sure you're protecting the people who are going to struggle. Obviously, we didn't do that. Government didn't agree that. And at this point in time, whilst we'll still ask for it, there's been no indication either way from the new government about what their position will be on council tax capping.
Thank you, Duncan. Not seeing any other. Liz.
Sorry. I just wanted to bring forward some other suggestions that we've not yet covered in this paper. One of them would be asking officers for a timetable for an additional piece of work on the single person discount, including a moratorium, because I know that was very effective at a former administration of Mendip, and also to put together a proposal for more work to be done on getting a higher percentage onto direct debit. I know that many of the more complex cases that come to me as lead member, and which Richard and his colleagues have dealt with so efficiently, are almost always from people who don't pay by direct debit. So I would really welcome that. And I also think we need to understand that last year the rates went up by the DWP inflation figure, which was actually quite a bit higher then. And I think this coming year, that inflation figure is almost certain to be lower. And then the ratio between that and council tax increase, I think, is also a relevant point. So those two extra pieces of work, I understand completely that officers are working really hard on putting the 4 areas of Somerset together into one piece of software, one system. So I'm not suggesting that we break into that workload, but I am asking for a timetable for these 2 other additional pieces of work. And I ask colleagues as well to consider what the DWP inflation rate might be for 25-26. I'm listening to the debate. We maybe have some different views between us, but I completely accept that trying to get small amounts of money from people who can't pay may well actually cost us more than the money we're trying to recover. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Heather, do you want to come back?
Yes, please. I really appreciate what Liz has added into that. I just wanted to have an idea because, and I know we have the 2 very conflicting desires here and absolute mandates, really legitimate things you'd be doing. One is to protect our most vulnerable residents. The other is to try to keep our budget on track for our authority. Otherwise, you won't be able to protect anybody if we don't have an authority. So those extra bits that Liz has just mentioned there, we're talking about quite a smallish, between trying to find 5 million or 2 million in terms. Would there be, have we any idea what impact those extra things might have in terms of possible savings generation?
May I just come back to say, I don't think we can possibly ask that today. Don't forget as well that on page 60, the line G, reducing the maximum backdating period, it's not possible to model that either at the moment. So there are 3 other possibilities here, row G on page 60, and the other 2 that I'm putting forward, and that particular percentage increase from DWP that may all have an effect that could be favourable to the viability of the council.
Thank you, Richard.
It's just really a question on last time round. We considered our scheme to be relatively generous, and that was in particular looking towards our financial situation at the time and what pressure it could ultimately add to our financial situation in regards to the government. Ultimately, it failed to have the desired result. However, if we go down the line of not having such a favourable scheme, it does put us in a position where we just don't have that ask. Would that be a fair summation? And I'm looking to our 151 officer.
It's quite hard to understand what the government policy in this area is likely to be. I don't think there's been any sort of indications so far around council tax. They've clearly said they're not going to look at the whole scheme and rebase the whole scheme. Quite how much local freedoms there are. And it was the Labour government that brought in capping in the first place. It wasn't in place and before that. I don't know is the honest answer. But just picking up on Liz's point around we can't model things like the direct debit increases and how much more efficient that makes you, or the pushing the single person discount, having a campaign so that you have a bit of an amnesty. In other places where we have done this, we have seen income increase as a result of it. It's quite hard to give you a precise figure on it. You are talking hundreds of thousands type impact. And there is a balance between how we use our staff. You obviously want people to pay direct debit because then we're not chasing the debt, it comes in automatically. And it's about supporting those people that are in trouble. There's a real fine art in all of this of getting that balance right. Authorities that have been too tough have actually lost money. It's cost them more money as a council as a whole, how it's worked through the whole system, rather than getting that balance right. So it is a very difficult situation for members, this one.
Thank you, Jason. Not seeing anybody else, so go to other members next. I've got Councillor Chilcott first and Councillor Mansell online. Good morning, Mandy.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to ask some questions. So for me, there are several concerns probably with the paper here. And the first one really, is the commentary that we're extrapolating figures from one council across to the whole council. My concern is that that might be a good or a bad thing, and you might try and make savings that actually don't need to be made if we had, I suppose, some more accurate reporting across all of the previous councils. Within that, it gives us a huge advantage because the different councils ran different schemes, and so you'd be able to look at those schemes and see where those bad debts were, what elements of people in our county were struggling. And my appeal last year is the same as I'm going to make again. We haven't had a member seminar on it. I think it would have been really helpful to understand the absolute full range of what could have come forward. And within that, we then could have had an understanding of who will be affected and how many. And for me, that's still a missing. So I will make that plea for next year. I asked for it last year for this year, and we're still not seeing it. So that's my sort of first question and plea. The second question is around collection rates and how our bad debts were in the last year. Have we got any figures on that so we can start to understand how impacted? Because bad debts are a good way to gauge who is managing and who is not. Have we got any figures on that at least? And has that driven what we're seeing before us today? Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer those questions, Chair. So I'll start with the last one first, if I can, in terms of bad debt. Yes, we will have data now in relation to the overall collection rates for last year. I don't have that to hand, I'm afraid. Obviously, that is something certainly that we will look when we're bringing the report to scrutiny in August to actually include information in that report in regard to that. However, I do think it's important to realise that obviously whilst the CTR scheme and how generous or otherwise it is will have an impact on that collection rate. It's not the only factor that will impact on that. Obviously, last year was the first year of the new council. We obviously also introduced a new finance system. Members will recall that there were issues for a period of time with actually posting cash. That sort of factor will also impact on things like collection rates. In relation to the questions about extrapolating the data, unfortunately, that's simply a necessity at the minute because we are still within the service running on the 4 different systems that we inherited from the legacy district councils. They work in different ways. Some frankly were able to model better in some than others. And actually also from a resource perspective, a lot of the focus within the service at the moment necessarily has got to be on the project that we have commenced to actually merge those 4 systems into a single system, which actually in the longer term, once we Sorry, can you hear me?
No, the sound went completely.
Okay. So we're looking to try and complete that work by the end of the next financial year. Actually, at that point, we then will be on a single system with a single modelling tool, which will make all of this sort of stuff a lot easier. At the moment, we're struggling though to model across those 4 systems. But again, we are looking to bring to you, along with the report in August, a much more detailed assessment in relation to actually how the changes that you decide to consult upon, if implemented, potentially could impact on individual claimants, and also where we can, how that impacts through to collection rates.
Thank you. Just to come back, I suppose previously in a previous council, we used to see a whole range of options and understand those before you went to consultation. And for me, that's still the missing bit, probably for yourself as exec members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mandy. Now going to Dave Mansell online. Good morning, Dave.
Yep, thank you. Good morning. I've been listening with interest, and have to say that I share concerns that have been raised, and in connection with those, I do have some further points I think worth making. First, though, I think I should say that it would have been better if this report had come to scrutiny before coming to executive. I think it would have helped with the proposals and looking at some of the questions now arising. And personally, I feel disappointed that did not occur on this occasion. I note it's going afterwards, but that's not the same. As has been drawn attention to, changes to this scheme will have an impact, and that is a cause for concern. It will clearly have an impact on those with low incomes, those with disabilities, single parents, amongst others. What Richard just mentioned in terms of giving more information on those impacts, that clearly would be helpful in coming to a view on this, and it would be better to have that information before deciding what's taken to consultation. And when proposals are put to consultation, it has to be noted that this will cause concern amongst the claimants. As I understand it, this information will go direct to all claimants. They're amongst the main consultees. They will be very concerned by what they read. I can't help but say that it's difficult to understand and difficult to respond, and I think that should be kept in mind. How this will be received by by people receiving it. I also wish to comment on something which a couple of the members, including Councillor Darch, mentioned in relation to what may happen to council tax in the future. Now, clearly, it's speculating, and none of us know what even be possible at the current time. And it's another example of how there's a timing problem, but an important connection. So we're looking at a reduction scheme in relation to council tax without knowing what might happen to council tax in the future. And at the moment, that's not mentioned in the consultation or in this report. And clearly, there is a possibility that this council may need to look at, if it's able to do so, increasing council tax. And that has an impact in its own right on the need for the reduction scheme. And I feel that should be taken into account. And at the moment, it's not. So those are the points that I wish to make. I guess the sort of conclusion on that is that, for my money, it's important to only go forward with proposals that are going to be seriously considered. I think because of how it would be received, I wouldn't put anything else in there, but it is your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mansell. I believe Councillor Lysham would like to respond.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point that I believe scrutiny, corporate and resources scrutiny, will have the opportunity to feed back to executive, and the fact that that comes after the consultation is published, I don't see that as a detriment. I see that as even possibly an advantage, that they'll be feeding back on the actual consultation rather than what we've been looking at before today, which are the options for consultation, because we asked officers to look at every option and present them to us in exactly the same way as we did when we were budget setting. And I think on the council tax, we just live with this because it is the timetable. We need the council tax reduction scheme in place before our budget setting in February. And my understanding is that will always be the case. And so we have to live with this and work with it. We've also just had a general election. So some papers may have come forward a little bit earlier if we'd not had the general election. But I think that we're doing the best we can. We're committed to that 10-week of consultation. We're committed to the consultation paper as agreed today going to corporate and resources scrutiny. I honestly believe that's the best we can do, and we're committed to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Moving now on to Francis Nicholson, please. Good morning, Francis.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. There's no point in me repeating what everybody's saying. I noticed that you're proposing to leave the foster guidance foster carer allowance in place. What I'd like to know what the implications are for the staying put scheme for children who remain after they're 18 with their people who were their foster carers. What the implications are there, what the implications in general are for care leavers and also for students.
The facial expression.
I think that's one I'd need to take away, to be honest with you. But if obviously, you know, if that is a specific area of concern, then when we come to scrutiny, we can look to perhaps try and provide more information in relation to that.
Thank you very much. That would be very helpful. I am aware that for a number of years, the former county council worked very closely with all the district councils to get to a point of a common way of supporting our most vulnerable young people, and the people for whom will have been corporate parents. I would be enormously sad and feel it utterly improper if we destroyed that work now.
My recollection is that isn't in these proposals in any way, shape or form.
Yes, just to be clear, Chair, the obviously on the 1st of April last year, we adopted a consistent approach to care leavers and council tax, which essentially said that any care leaver below 28 to 25 would be exempt from council tax. We're not proposing to change that in any way at all through this proposal.
Just to understand, if non-dependent is a and the change in option F wouldn't apply.
If the claimant is registered, if the care leaver is the liable person to pay council tax.
I'm so sorry. The sound is awful again. I'm afraid you're like down a big hole, all of you. I'm so sorry.
Okay, is that better?
No.
Okay. Are we able to investigate this thing, please?
And Chairman, you sound not good too as well. Sorry.
Well, that may just be it.
Yeah, it's echoey. It's echoey.
Okay. Can we just have a brief moment while we work out where the issue might be?
That's better for you, Bill.
Okay. We will do our best. We don't believe the problem is necessarily at our end beyond people speaking directly into the mics. It may be a problem with the signal. We'll do our best, but please just bear in mind we need to get the business transacted.
Okay, it's just that when we can't hear very important points, I wanted to let you know, that was all. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Richard, please carry on.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So we were on the point of care leavers. So where a care leaver is the liable person for council tax, then essentially that household's council tax is exempted. So this only, I guess, possibly has an effect where you've got a care leaver living with somebody else as a non-dependent, and where they are not liable for council tax. So yeah, if we end up deciding to introduce a non-dependent deduction, then potentially there could be an impact on that household.
And Councillor Nicholson's concern, and it comes under non-dependent deduction of £10 a week, which could, £10 a week doesn't sound like £520 over the year, sounds quite significant. I'm very happy to undertake to look at that with the officer to see if there's some way we can work on that and make it fairer. I do understand Councillor Nicholson's concern.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm taking a number of pieces of advice from people online as to what we think we can do to improve the staff. The only cameras that are on are the people speaking. Just looking across, is there any guidance from democratic services staff? Move phones away from any microphones, please. Okay, we will do our best, but we do appreciate we need to progress. Jill, you did have your hand up. I wasn't sure whether it was to speak or whether just to tell me that you couldn't hear me.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Thank you. I apologise. It went down. I was just going to say that the first speaker, Theo Butt-Phillips, I thought said everything very eloquently to this subject, and I don't think I want to add to it. I just wanted to say that I do feel sincerely that a briefing session on any changes or any things that you want to do would really be helpful to this council. I have to say, I think we're one council, and it is awful when some members who can't be here today, can't hear it, may not get to the consultation. I just feel it's a briefing session would be really, really good for the council. Just a point of view, but thank you, Chairman.
Okay, yeah, we're happy to do a briefing session. Is the guidance that I've received on that, and just to remind people that there is only one Theo Butt-Philip. It isn't Phillips. Just in case anyone's
my apologies.
And we are eternally grateful for that fact. Just seeing whether there's any other members or associates that want to come back. Councillor White, you've not come in before.
Thank you. Just to say that when looking at council tax, I think Councillor Lation referred to it. We did a very useful piece of work with Capita around single person's discount and making sure that that was appropriate, and also empty properties, again, particularly above shops, etc. Real effort was put in, and we did actually more than cover the costs of the work. And I do think that council tax for everybody is a significant part of people's budgets, and we've got to be seen to be as fair and as straightforward as possible for everybody. And the other element I wanted just to say was that when we talked about the carers allowance this time last year, we talked about would it make an impact? And the question I have is that, have we managed to retain carers in Somerset, and are we growing them? Because it is a real issue for our children if we don't have a really strong local carer group. And so I welcome protecting this allowance. And I would be interested to know whether there has been any, and I suspect it will only be anecdotal, whether this has actually made an impact. I hope it has.
I believe you were referring just to foster carers, not carers in general.
My apologies.
Yeah, just for clarity. Heather or Richard, do you want to come back on that now, or is that piece a question for later?
Well, I can come back to you with more later. I don't have that it would only be anecdotal, and I think that we'll talk in a minute about foster carers and our need to make it as the ones we have to keep as attractive for them that we do have and to get more people in. So I think we have to pull every lever, but forgive me, I haven't got the evidence. I don't think Richard has the evidence. We haven't got the evidence today, but we'll come back with it.
Thank you. But we can highlight that we are actively supporting people who are going to take up the challenge and also the pleasure of fostering.
Okay, not seeing any other comments or questions. Councillor Theobald Philip, I believe you had an amendment you wanted to make. Should we do that formally now, please?
Yes, please, Chair. If I can formally move, for the reasons I've articulated already, that we remove sections 3 and 5 of the consultation.
Okay, is that seconded? Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts. Can I see those lead members in favour of that amendment, please? And those against? And abstentions? Okay, that's clearly carried. So we move on to the substantive.
So, Chair, if I may just check, my request for a timetable for the additional pieces of work, does that need to be an amendment, or can that be something that is simply minuted?
It's not part of the consultation, is my understanding. So just the minutes can take that forward. Okay, are we happy with that? Okay, so we have an amended substantive now. Can I see a proposer for the substantive? Councillor Lyshawn, seconded Councillor Wilkins. Those in favour of the substantive, please. Those against, that's clearly carried. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We now move on to item 7. And Richard, thank you so much for all your contribution on this and your team. I really do appreciate the clarity in the papers and the quality of the explanation. Item 7, which is the budget monitoring report 24-25 emerging issues and the 23-24 provisional outturn. Councillor Lyshawn, Liz.
Thank you. So please note that this paper has been updated significantly since the Corporate and Resources Scrutiny meeting in June, and that the outturn figure is now more favourable. That is, of course, very welcome, as it protects our general fund reserves for this year, going into this year and as we go through this year, but of course it is far from the whole story. So the numbers are still draft and there may still be some minor amendments. We were expecting the full outturn papers for revenue, for capital and for the housing revenue account for August executive, but due to the challenges in closing down the previous financial year, these will now be presented at the August Corporate and Resources Scrutiny and at the September executive, which I believe is as early as the 2nd of September. Appreciate that that is late compared with what we were expecting, but our circumstances are exceptional and our external auditors have already recognised in a meeting with us that the first year of any new unitary council is a particular challenge. So although budget monitoring for this first year of Somerset Council and the first year using Microsoft Dynamics and Solver has been more challenging than previous years were for the 5 separate councils, we did have the early warning of the impact of inflation, interest rates and other factors which led us to declare a financial emergency in November 23 and take specific actions. These actions have clearly been effective and they have made a difference. I thank every single officer who has worked so hard to control and reduce spending as we have progressed through the financial emergency position. We can see that adults and children's both had large overspends in 23-24. The leader has already referenced our view that local government funding is broken and that these challenges will continue. We hope that the new government will work cross-party and I believe it's not expected to be in the King's Speech, but there has been press coverage of a proposed cross-party Royal Commission on social care. So we will await that with great anticipation. We must also not lose sight of the growing deficit on the dedicated schools grant, which you can see on page 99, where the statutory override can give a full sense of comfort. Councils all over the country are in the same position, in places much worse. And at the same time, we are seeing school reserves reducing as the DSG deficit is increasing. The capital outturn, when those figures are complete, will show considerable slippage in projects. That is not a surprise, and it has contributed to the reduction in need to borrow for Treasury management in 23-24. Of course, that need will now move into the current and future years. Appendix 9 gives us the position on delivery of savings from 23-24 and our current year's position. So that delivery of savings or identification of alternative savings where necessary is critical to the future of this council. And I do appreciate that it can be demanding for directors and managers to achieve savings or indeed to develop alternative savings. On the emerging issues paper, which is Appendix 10, we can see that the additional resources for adults have created a more stable situation at the moment, but I recognise that things can change and some factors, such as interest rates and energy costs, are out of our control. On children's, we need to understand the reasons behind the increased numbers of placements, the reducing numbers of foster carers. Take on board my colleague, Councillor White's comments from the previous item, and the possible mitigations. So if I may, Chair, I'd like to hand over to Jason Vaughan, our 151 officer, for any more detail that he thinks we need. Thank you.
Of course you may.
Thank you. Just in terms of the figures, the reason for this report coming to you is important we keep you updated with the very latest. These aren't the final figures Councillor Lashon has set out, but they're pretty close. So there might be some minor changes to them, but they'll be in that sort of ballpark if I describe it as that. On capital, we will see that significant slippage, and on the HRA, you're expecting a small underspend as well. So that sets out the whole picture. We will try and bring it to you in August, but I think it's more likely these reports will finalise to the September committee. If we can do it, we will do. Just on page 67, we talk about the first year, and Grant Thornton did set out to the last audit committee the troubles with new unitaries and getting the first set of accounts across the line. We have certainly worked the audit committee quite hard this year. They have approved 10 different sets of accounts. Those going back to 2021 have now all been completed. All the 21-22 counts have all been completed. The only outstanding account we have now is the 22-23 for South Somerset. We're hoping to complete that shortly. That, when you look nationally, is an amazing piece of work, an amazing picture to be in. It's really important because that gives us our opening position for Somerset Council. Without having that sorted, reducing the 23-24 accounts for Somerset Council is obviously more difficult if you don't know your starting position. So that's why we've put so much effort into that. It is the first year of the new unitary, and the budget was set through the LGR process. We set out in the paper there with the budget working group. Just on the practical term, you've got to remember most of the budget holders outside adults and children's were new. They inherited budgets from the 5 different councils. Each of those councils budgeted all in slightly different ways. So this has been a year of aligning those budgets across the piece. I suspect we haven't fully finished that across the piece either. So there'll be more of that work. So it's just more complex than you would have in a normal council. On page 69, talk about the update and how things have moved during the year. So when we did the first budget monitoring back in month 3, that £28.6 million forecast overspend, 5% of the budget. That did set the alarm bells going. We did take actions. We put in place those control boards and the care panels have been effective. it's quite hard to put a number precisely on them. They have changed the organisational behaviour. We will be bringing back to August a paper updating those because they need refinement based on our learning so far of what works really well, what's efficient, actually what's just a pain in the neck and we could take out, etc. So we'll be bringing that back to you at your next meeting. You'll see in table 1 on page 70 that monthly trend across all of the services where we see those variances changing. We have seen those care services, adults and children's, continue with that adverse trend, the rest of the council being underspent, with the bottom line being £1.6 million underspent. Considering we were 5% over, I think that shows a remarkable position to get into that place and certainly helps us going forward. On page 71, you'll see those key headline figures for each of the executive director areas and some words around each of those. In terms of the dedicated schools grant, that is an area, although slightly performed better than we forecast, it's still not a great place to be with such a significant deficit, and the emphasis on getting the in-year balanced first of all before we tackle the historic deficit, and we will need government help like other councils such as Devon have received. But I will just flag up to members that is a real risk. It's a real risk to virtually every, not quite every single one, but the majority of other tier councils in terms of when that statutory override ends, there is a real potential for that to wipe out our reserves. So that is an area that needs to be really focused on going forward. I won't go into treasury management because there's a separate paper on that on your agenda in a minute. Page 76 touches on the reserves position and taking into account our outturn. This actually is really pleasing that our reserve position would be around £52 million worth of general reserves. That's within our risk-based assessment of minimum of 30, maximum of 60. So it sits healthily within that range. That's a lot better than when we were looking at this position back in month 3. So that feels a lot better place to be, shall we say. So they're the kind of key things in terms of looking back. We have for the month 2 position in terms of the current financial year, so 24-25, we've done a full exercise for adults and children's budgets because of the size of them and the risks associated with them. And we have done a more headline approach of just looking at the key issues in the others. You'll see in paragraph 53 there, pulling out the major variances. So adults, potential underspend of 1.7 million. I'll say that again, underspend of 1.7 million at this stage. That's very pleasing compared to the pattern. Children's, families and education services, potential overspend of 5.1 million. I'm sure we'll touch on that in the debate in a minute. Waste, you have a separate paper on later. And the corporate contingency is £6 million uncommitted at this stage. The main area that has traditionally covered will be the pay award. We budgeted at 4%. We've seen the offers. Some have been accepted by trade unions, some rejected. It's in that sort of ballpark. So I'm not expecting major draw on contingency for the pay award. So that's the kind of the overall position. Very happy to take any questions or clarify any points.
Thank you, Jason. Just looking around the room. Ross, do you want to kick off?
Thank you. I know we're going to be talking in depth around this paper, but I'd just like to make one observation. To bring in the council, literally landing it on a sixpence, which is what playing with the within 1.5, is a remarkable feat. And I congratulate the finance team. But more to the point, I would like to thank every member of staff because the frustration and the agony they've had to go through this year, talking and trying to get things through the various boards, the boards which I think you are now refining, which I'm glad to hear. But it's really, the result is only down to individual efforts and caring. And they have been incredibly caring. And I've had lots of examples of members of staff just trying to save penny halfpenny here and collectively they produce this result. And though we can say, you know, grandly as an executive, something's been produced, it's actually down to every single person. And I just want to say that before we go into any of the detail is a thank you to the staff.
Thank you, Ross. I think we would all echo that to get to this position under the outturn. Well, I appreciate all the it's a draft and so on, but it's a remarkable achievement to have got there, and I do thank all colleagues who've been involved in making it so. I think we do need to go to children's and just have a look at particularly what's happening there in the budget monitoring report. Heather.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ros, as well for those words. I know there'll be a lot of officers listening and very grateful for that. We do the easy bit at the front here. They do an awful lot of the really hard work under difficult circumstances. So if I could just say a couple of things, pick a few highlights out. I know that both Liz and Jason have done a lot to highlight some of the big points. Looking back at last year, we had the 126 million overall budget, and by month 10 we were looking at about 14 million over. We have reduced that to 12, but we can't take that as a great success, because that still means we were over. The reasons for the overspend, if you like, or the above budget spend, does mirror the national picture, I'm afraid to say. But for us personally here, what it's saying is that we had, and our numbers of children looked after have increased, and they've increased in complexity, and that will always increase the costs. Similarly, the support we give for people in their own homes as well, those numbers have gone up, and that's increased what's referred to as field work. So there are real children behind those numbers and real families receiving help, and that comes at a cost. And I think also a little bit around the SEND transport budget, we had some inflationary increases and also some increases in number, and that also meant that we still had that 12.4 overspend at the end of the year. Of course, the DSG, the Direct Schools Grant, as Jason's referenced as well, again, we're going to be looking at a £15 million overspend, I think, on that one, which would give a cumulative 36 million at this point. And I think the schools are often very prudent. That's what I'm hearing. The schools will prudently say that their deficits they might be coming with a deficit, but in reality, I think that prudence is a small percentage. We will see in this year an increase of about £8 million in school deficits across the 118 schools or whatever we look after. So we know it's going to get tougher, and we will traditionally, the overspend, this is the overspend from what the government give us, which is not enough to meet our central schools and our high needs block of education provision. It's not enough. We're not getting enough from government, and our needs are increasing. But we have to cover the overspend, any overspend. That's traditionally been done through school balances, and of course, as the balances go down, that increases our risk. So it's not money coming out of our council tax in the main, but the overspend is, and that gets problematic for us probably by about 2026. Which is not just because it's the statutory override time, that might get kicked down the line, but in 2026, that year, we may well not be able to cover it, and that will be quite difficult. So the work that's already going on the deficit management plan, there's all kinds of there's DMPs and DBVs and DSGs, but essentially what that means is the overspend which is happening across the country is being worked at incredibly tightly through one of our government-backed initiatives called the Delivering Better Value. We're recognised as having an overspend, but not the biggest type of overspend. We've got £1 million coming to our pot to actually make sure we could put some real effort into reducing that. We're certainly making the most of it. I'll come on to mitigations in a minute. So that's where we are from last year. This year already, yes, of course, we're seeing a £5.1 million overspend. That again has similar kind of origins. We now have 613 children looked after. That's a 30, well, I think even in March, before we got to 600 and something, we've had 30 more children coming into our care since July last year. That comes with cost. They're coming in very complex. They're coming in as teens. And they're complicated children to be looking after. It's expensive. So that accounts for 3.9 million of the overspend of the 5.1. 1.2 is around education, our education support, and a lot of that's about the inflationary increase to supporting our schools. We're putting huge amounts of effort into supporting our schools wherever we can. We have things called core groups where we go in and just kind of descend on a school that's in trouble. All of that takes time and money, and we're a little bit out of whack with that one, but we're looking at it. So just to give you a little bit of explanation on some of the things we talk about, there's some really good graphs in we have so many pages on children. So I was going back over them again, and I'll forgive all of you for not knowing where everything is. But certainly there's some really good graphs for this year where you can see beautifully that the number of unregistered placements, those are the ones which we have to take in extremis. They're the ones that are basically illegal, which we want the fewest of we can possibly get away with, but we have so little capacity in the system. We have to take them sometimes. They have gone down in direct correlation really with the places going up in our Homes and Horizons provision, which is brilliant, almost direct correlation, but those graphs sing it out very well. However, that's only a small number of our children looked after. For the rest who need residential care rather than fostering, we're still struggling with not having enough foster carers. So it's all of our efforts to get foster carers on the books. But the residential costs as well, ironically, it used to be that unregistered places were the most expensive. Well, they're going down in cost by about 25%. But our residential places are going up in cost by about 15%, and many more are in residential. So that's already our problem. So what we're working on to try to, and I haven't even mentioned the very helpful court system, who sometimes insist on things. They love to give us 24/7 orders to look after somebody in their own home 24/7, and that takes a huge amount of money, thousands and thousands a week. So just in terms of mitigations, obviously we're working super hard on our fostering to increase that wherever we can. We have two types of fostering actually in some respects. Well, there's three. In the mainstream fostering, you have independent foster carers through agencies and you have our own in-house. We're working super hard to get our own in-house. But we've had some success with our super high needs fostering through the Homes and Horizons project, where we've got 4, sounds like a small number, but 4 new high needs Homes and Horizons who have taken some of our children. So that's already a success, but in a small way. So we need more of that. We're obviously working on our children looked after sufficiency, so we can model where they are, where they live, how we look after them, how we can make the most for them. We're also looking at sufficiency around schools as well. But one of the biggest things we can be doing as well is on our SEND, our special educational needs system. We have been working super hard the last few months around working at our blockages in our processes. We identified a number, but we've actually resolved 114 children who were stuck in the system without support, and putting that laser light focus on there has actually helped that. That's helped tremendously. We're going to continue with that one. That's a very important part of it. We have had external support, of course, to help us, but right now we're doing all of this pretty much on our own, which is great. We have our education for life system strategy. If we can, and I can't miss early help. Early help in all of its forms is really important. So that means early help in our communities through Connect Somerset. It means early help in our schools, meaning that we don't wait until a child has such a need they have to have an EHCP, education healthcare plan, in order to get what they need. We need to get in there with our graduated response at the start, so children get picked up early and they get helped where they are. If we can have the children in the right schools, they'll be close to home, transport budgets will come down. We won't be spending a lot on independent, non-maintained special schools. We have some fabulous maintained special schools. Joe and I went to see one just the other day, which I will say got an outstanding across the board Ofsted, one of our own, smashing. We need more of those. And we've got some places coming up, 60 in 2006 and 120 in September, but they're never enough. So if we can make sure our children are in the right schools, that's what all of our efforts are going into. So that's the kind of personal touch on the mitigations, if I could. Richard, is there anything I've missed out from saying? Oh, sorry. Let me say it.
No, very comprehensive. I was just going to add in that there is a really ambitious transformation programme going on at the moment as well. And that captures a lot of the things which we've talked about already, but it might provide a bit of a summary. So we've got 4 quadrants to that. I've just clicked off the slide, which has them on. So the first one is that local mainstream school is the right choice for most children. So a huge piece of work around that in the education side of things. We're also developing an excellent workforce for children. Clearly, best workforce means that we get the best outcomes and reduce the demand then coming into our services. We're putting in place sufficient homes for children in care and school places for children with additional needs in Somerset. And you'll see more joining together between that education and care part of the world, because we think if we work better together, that means that we'll have a more efficient overall service. And then, as Heather was mentioning, families can access support early. So that includes the Connect Somerset work, the huge amount of work we're doing in communities with our champions, and especially around schools. What we see is young people coming through into the care system that we didn't know about before, when actually we could have done something if we'd wrapped around schools better and worked closer with them. And so that's a really big focus of improvement. I know it feels a long way away from the costs sometimes, but actually it's not that far away from the costs, and it's something we can absolutely do. So we've got the Children Looked After Sufficiency Strategy, which I think colleagues have seen before, and we are significantly increasing the fostering, or ambitions to do so. It is increasing gradually at the moment, but we need to ramp that up. We've got the further homes for Homes and Horizons, so 6, 7 and 8 that I'm sure colleagues have heard of as well. Pods annexes opening. We're getting really good outcomes for those young people, where actually other providers can't get good outcomes for those young people. So that's fantastic. And also, if we look at a financial perspective, that reduces through life costs as well later on for the council. So really important, but most important, the outcomes for those young people there. Move on accommodation for young people. We're trying to get the Thrive 16 Plus contract working really tightly at the moment. So that's a supported accommodation contract with the 2 YMCA providers that we have in the area. We're also putting a dynamic purchasing system in place. And what we need is more move on accommodation. So we're working quite hard on that. So where young people can move to, there are challenges around high levels of rent locally, lack of social housing, things like that, which we need to address. We've heard about delivering better value for SEND, the process redesign, restructuring, and a new SEND sufficiency strategy as well to help improve how we're working with our independent non-maintained schools. The transport efficiencies, quite significant efficiencies coming through from that transport programme at the moment, and then that redesigned early help model and that work with schools, reducing escalation wherever we can. To have better lives for our residents, but also reduce the overall cost of services.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Richard, for that comprehensive overview of where we are with trying to get our children's spend closer to where we would like it to be. I think one of the main messages I would take away from that is the need for foster care placements. That with the demand for placements has gone significantly up. That I would assume is a tale of COVID and the difficulties that a lot of our young people had during COVID with isolation. It's impacted mental health, which is not a surprise. But we need to have that sufficiency of foster care placements to be able to meet that need. And that is something that I would see as being something that people from across Somerset can help with. If you know anybody who could be a foster carer, whether it's through a voluntary organisation, through a faith organisation, through parish councils or anything, that's where we can build on this through our communities. So thank you so much. Councillor Sarah Wakefield, do you want to just comment on adults?
Yeah, just very briefly, actually, on this. Thank you very much. I would like to also say the sound is much better online at the moment. Thank you. I just wanted to say about the outturn for last year, just briefly. We have quite a lot of interface, as people know, with the NHS, particularly in the intermediate care sector. And those figures cannot really be finalised until after the end of the financial year, because the NHS doesn't want to do it either until we get to that point. So I think the last year's figure, which is slightly higher than we had hoped, is really to do with that working out at the end of the year. And we are working hard on intermediate care with the NHS. It's an area that I personally want to focus on, just to see what we can do to make it more efficient and perhaps a bit less expensive. We are doing okay in the budget so far this year, and I'm pleased with that. It is the first time my officers tell me that they've had a proper budget, which is not just, oh, let's give them a bit more because they didn't do very well last year or they were overspent last year. This is a proper financed budget that has been looked at carefully. Now, obviously, if we have an influx of people whose capital drops below the baseline, and that baseline may well be changing under the government proposals to a higher rate. We have a lot of people like that. It will cost a lot more, and there's lots of other issues that could come up. But yes, at the moment, we are very pleased that the budget appears to be working well. My question was that Jason mentioned the general fund reserve, which is pleasing. And again, this is a provisional outturn. I know at the moment there's a lot more work to be done. I just wondered how confident we are that that is going to be something near the final figure, because it's so important to us going forwards that we have these reserves intact.
Jason, do you want to pick that one up?
So the work we're doing at the moment is just checking across to check, obviously, as we're first year closed down on a new finance system, bringing 5 budgets together. We are just double checking absolutely everything ties back to what we think it does, and all those checks sort of tie together and give us sensible answers. We've done 90% of that. So I think the figures are fairly accurate. We're not aware of anything, aware of some very minor changes. So, for instance, I think there's some additional costs of extra audit fees we need to build in as accruals on here, but there's also some actually Section 31 business rate income going the other way. So there'll be some minor swings, but I'm not expecting it to significantly change from that 1.6. It's in the right ballpark. So that gives us some confidence around the level of reserves, that they are at the more healthier end of the spectrum than what we were forecasting earlier in the year. So hopefully some good news.
Thank you, Jason. Mel, was there anything you wanted to add to Sarah's contribution? No, you nailed it, Sarah. Thank you. Any other league members or associates want to speak on this paper? I'm not seeing any, so I'll go to other members. So go to Mandy first and then Jill.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I suppose my thanks have also got to be echoed to Jason and the team. It's been a colossal year of work, hopefully not one to be repeated. And, you know, huge thanks to all of them. I know they've been under pressure and they've had a really great outcome, not the least of the previous accounts being signed off. So looking at this year's outturn, it's pleasing to see it's not a huge overspend. But within that is a frustration that it moves so much in that last sort of couple of months since the last report. I think the danger with that always is that you'll have your services working to a budget, trying desperately to make savings everywhere, when actually perhaps they didn't quite need to when you come to some of the year-end figures. I think that's a challenge going forward with the budget. So there are some areas of concern for me, and there you've almost, with some very large underspends in some areas, it's almost masked that challenge of children and adults, which we can still see within the paper. And also of concern is the unachieved savings. We've got a large amount of unachieved savings, 37% in adults, 31% in children's, and 47% in resources and corporate. And certainly savings are going to be key moving forwards. And for me, it is a concern that quite a lot of them have not been achieved. Now, I've read in the paperwork the reasons and rationale for that. But, you know, moving forwards, if you are not achieving on a saving, you're going to have to find something else to put in its place. Otherwise, you will have challenges moving forwards. So first question really is around, there's a huge favourable variance, a couple of very large ones. One's in climate in place. So my first question is around that. It says that the local plan budget was underspent, and I think it's by hundreds of thousands. So I understood that the local plan work was meant to have started. Does that underspend mean that that work hasn't started? So that's my first question. And the other one's in relation to non-service, and again, a £10 million swing in the budget, a huge figure. I mean, we've heard earlier how we want to protect those vulnerable families, and if you are getting differences of 10 million in another area of the council, potentially moving forward, that's money you could save to help our families and those under pressure in Somerset. So I've read in the papers, it said the main saving relates to a lower forecast debts due to the overall level of debt decreasing during the year. But when I look at the debt tables, there's not much decrease in the debt figures overall. I do note that there's a decrease substantially in the cash that we hold. So what I'm trying to get to is really that £10 million, you know, if we were to put that against debt, 5% interest, that would cover almost £200 million of debt. I'm just trying to get an understanding of that 10 million. Huge figure. Jason, I'm really happy to have that conversation offline. But for me, there's very little in the report about that, and it's a big figure and sort of stands out. Thank you.
That's sorry, it's like watching Wimbledon at the moment. Who'd like to go first?
I'll kick off and then others can add to it. On the debt situation, we are actively and continually selling assets, as you are aware, both commercial and other assets. We have been particularly successful in completing a number within this financial year, and I'm pleased to say that probably one of the most difficult assets, commercial assets, we've inherited from the district council, because you must remember all the commercial assets were bought for the long term, not for short-term disposal, and therefore they're challenging. But the one which we're particularly pleased about and has completed, and 1.255 million more than the valuation, Steelite in the Midlands, and that's been completed. And so we've completed, and it's 14.255 million contribution to ensuring that in terms of the debt, that has been has assisted, and there are a number of other assets way down the line, and which will also be there for contribution to the debt. You mentioned, before I hand over to others, the planning issue. The local plan has started. It was a figure when we put the monies into the budget. We weren't quite sure exactly how much would be needed initially, because, as you well know, the initial parts of a local plan process is about collecting data, doing the research and the surveys. And one of the things which we have been successful with is to combine it with the work for the growth board, where the government, the last government, required us by the end of the year to have a new economic plan in place. And so a lot of the work which is being done for the economic plan will actually also play into the local plan. I do think the local plan will continue to be really challenging for us. And so the monies which haven't been spent this year may or may not need to be called on in part going forward. But as with all local plans, it's about working with what's already available, what we can add on. We have the Greater South West also doing some research, which we're using again for the local plan. So yes, it's well and truly en route. Yes, we're collecting data. We're doing all the right things at the beginning of the process, and we're actually being quite imaginative in terms of using work which other people are doing and funding. So more update will be at the Strategic Planning Committee, I think in September, where we are with the local plan.
Okay, Jason.
Yep, some really good comments there, Mandy, and I think I agree with him. And on page 70, you'll see, we've done the trend on each service of the month 3 to Outturn and the graphs and that. When you look at the bottom line figure, you go, oh, it's really good, 1.6 million. It does mask lots of things within it. So unpacking that, there are lots of things happening. So as part of the financial strategy approved by council in April, was to review the outturn for the year and see what savings we could take out just by looking across the budgets. We set a target between £3 and £7 million. I think now that the outturn is nearly there, we can start that process. So we'll bring those forward at a later date. I think it does throw up that the control boards have been effective during the year. They need some tweaking to make them functional going forward. We'll bring that back to you in August. I think it does throw up also around, we need to do more training for budget holders. I think some people are new to the process. Indeed, some of the finance staff monitoring the budgets are new to that as well. So there's that whole combinations in some areas of learning the budgets for the first time. I think that flows through. On the non-service one in particular, you'll see the forecast there of about 3 million a month, 10, then it comes in at 10 million at year end. That in the whole, there's other bits within it. I'm happy to give you the breakdown and talk in more detail around it. That is around the sort of cash flow and the impacts on that. As Councillor Wyke has said, we've had a far more positive capital receipts coming in. At the same time, we've seen slippage on the capital programme as well. So that has impacted on our borrowing figures and our cash flow forecast. So great in terms of the budget. That's something we are working on to get more accurate going forward, how we monitor that treasury management piece. And I think this year was a bit of a learning year on that. So I wouldn't expect that to be repeated the same sort of size going forward. So there are lots of individual things within here that need unpacking. And over the next couple of months, we'll make sure we do that.
Thank you very much. And I hear about the control boards and how helpful you think they have been. But when we look at these, our adults and children's were still well overspent. So are we saying that without the control boards, they might have been even more overspent? And if so, I suppose, how do you keep that momentum moving forward into next year?
So the control boards have absolutely helped the organisation, educated people in making them think about spending money before they've even spent it. So they've had a positive impact on the organisation in its wider financial management sense. There are panels within both adults and children's, where those peer panels, where they're assessing care packages. And I think it's fair to say over the last year, finance has been a lot more on the agenda and those topics have flowed through. I guess we're starting to see the impact on that within the adults budget in the current year, where that has gone positive. So absolutely, we will need to keep a laser-like focus on both adults and children's, given the size and the impact they have on the rest of the council. But I guess without the rest of the council covering those, we'd have been in a far worse position and our reserves would have been under that much more pressure. So that bottom line of coming in underspent really does help us going forward, because let's be clear, setting the next year's budget is not going to be easy. We know that. Not going to be lots of money flowing through to local government. I think that's quite clear from what we've seen so far. So that pressure will still maintain. So it's kind of like, well done, breathe a sigh of relief, but heads down, got to get on with it again pretty quickly.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to Jill, Councillor Slocum. Hello.
Thank you again, Chairman. I do have a question, but I just want to say, as obviously Chair of the Scrutiny Adults and Social Care, our job is to be a critical friend, and as you see on Appendix 1, it says the adult services overspend is 25 million due to an increase in both fee levels for care homes, placements, delivery of care homes. What we've done is we've been doing a lot of work on this in our scrutiny, and what we found, and this is just giving you a little bit of a deep dive, more so than just on the outside of the budget, the discharge planning needs to be improved. And we've found that where this council is paying for people waiting to be discharged to go home or to go into a nursing home or into a care home, this is where the money comes. So what we really need to know is that you're happy for us to carry on this deep dive, because we've been doing a lot of work on this. And we do also feel that under adults care, that we're not offering people to go home first. That's not the first option, where it will be a great saving because many want to go home rather than go into a nursing home or a residential home. So my question to you is that you're happy for us to carry on with this deep dive, because I do believe that we can find significant savings because of the time lapse is absolutely massive, the time lapse where this council is having to fund to why people are being assessed. Mr. Chairman.
Mel, do you wish to respond on that one?
Yes, so what I think you're talking about here is the 6 weeks when somebody goes into so they're in hospital, they come out of hospital, and perhaps they go into a bedded pathway for that reablement offer. And in there, Health will fund for up to maximum of, so it may be a week while somebody's having a reablement offer, but can fund up to 6 weeks. After that 6 weeks, we have to then pick that up. And what we're trying to do is get that as short as possible, so that we're working with those individuals 2-3 weeks in to deliver that differently. And I think that's the area you're talking about. And yes, we are very well aware of that and are working really closely to think that through. And Sarah described that piece when she talked about intermediate care and how we work better in that intermediate care space. So I think that's what you're on about. We're very well aware of that and we're working on that.
If I could just, Mr. Chairman, just say that what we've found out is that there has been a much longer period. Sometimes it's gone into 12 weeks plus. And that may not be of anyone's fault, just due down to staffing, due down to many, many factors. But what we're saying is we really need to streamline that because that is a massive, massive cost to this council.
Thank you for your advice, Jill. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
Well, yes, just if I may, just to simply say that people must remember about adult social care, that it is a bespoke service. We are looking at each person individually and working out what their best needs and care is. It's not a package that's on a shelf waiting to be picked up. And from that point of view, we've got care homes who might say, we're not taking that person. We've got people with needs that can't be satisfied at home, even though they want to be at home because their partners or whoever it else, there's all sorts of complexities in the cases. We are trying to unpick the delays that Jill's talking about, but you know, I just think you just need to all remember that this is not a one size fits all. It's a very complicated situation. I would like it to be more streamlined if possible. But, and I know we're working on that, but just remember that there are people out there who don't agree with what we suggest. They say, no, I'm not doing that. That makes it go on for longer. So families may disagree, the person themselves may disagree. We are a person-centered service and we do take into account everybody's views, but we do experience resistance sometimes when we're trying to get people out of hospital and into some home care.
Thank you, Sarah. David.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. It's a very straightforward question relating on page 71 to the gain share income connecting Devon and Somerset. I'd just like to understand what that size of that gain share was, how you get a gain share from that contract, and whether it's a one-off or a repeating gain share.
Becky, do you want to take that one?
And what was it there for originally? Sorry.
It's one-off. It relates to a legacy contract. I'm pretty sure we provided a written answer previously. If you don't mind, it just with the detail there, it's probably easier to reply. But it's
happy to go and find it.
Okay, not seeing any more comments or questions, so take us back to the recommendations, which are to note the draft outturn for services for 23-24, to note the final 23-24 outturn for revenue, capital and HRA will be reported to the executive. I believe that it says at its August meeting. Is that still?
It may very well be September. So
okay,
if we can bring it in August, we will do. Definitely by September.
Can we just have a drafting amendment to full stop at the an executive, and we'll take out at its August meeting, just so that we've got that flexibility to do it in September. C notes the 24-25 emerging issues identified at month 2. D agrees to continue to receive monthly budget monitoring reports which set out the forecast outturn for the year with details of mitigations and actions taken to address any forecast variances, and to agree to receive a report in August setting out the proposals to change how the control boards and panels operate in the light of their experience and learning over the last year. Do I have a proposal for that? Councillor Lyshawn, second. Councillor White, those in favour, please, from the members. Against, that is clearly carried. Thank you. Which brings us on to item 8, which is the Treasury Management End of Year Reports. Councillor Lyshawn to introduce.
Thank you. So this report is necessary for compliance with the CIPFA Code of Practice, and it summarises cash flows, borrowing, treasury investments and management of associated risks for the last financial year 23-24. The report was considered by the Audit Committee in their May meeting, and the committee recommended it to the executive today and then to full council, which will be later this week. So I will, if I may, hand over to Alan Sanford, our Principal Investment Officer, to take us through some of the detail and the purpose of the report. Thank you, Alan.
Good morning, Alan. Thank you.
Good morning. This is the Treasury Management Year-End Report for 23-24. It's required by the Local Government Act 2003. And importantly, it gives assurance that Treasury activities undertaken in full compliance with relevant legislation, codes, strategies, policies and practices. It went to Audit Committee on the 30th of May. To give some external context, UK bank rate was raised 3 times from 4.25% in March 2023 to 5.25% in August 2023, where it has remained since. There were expectations that it might have gone up to 6%, so that's the environment we've been working in. And the investment and borrowing rates have remained elevated with a fair amount of volatility, and there are tables in Appendix B that show this. The inherited borrowing position of Somerset Council is laid out in Table 1.37, and it shows that £53 million was borrowed between the councils, between legacy councils, and this was effectively quashed on the 1st of April. There was also 206 million of temporary borrowing from other local authorities, most of it maturing during 23-24. Tables 2 and 3 and the graph points 38 to 40 show this, the movements in borrowing and the rates paid. 210 cash deposits totaling nearly 1.4 billion were made during the year, mostly to money market funds to maintain sufficient liquidity to pay down the short-term maturing debt. Gross investment balances stood at 192 million on the 31st of March 24, and this was a reduction of about 100 million, mostly which was paid to pay back the NHS Somerset. The legacy portfolios and investment balance information at the beginning and end of this period can be seen in tables 5 to 8, points 70 to 75 of this report. Happy to take any questions if anybody wants some more detail.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Any questions from lead members? Liz?
Thank you, Chair. This is a genuine question. Is there a limit to the holding that we can have in the CCLA property fund? I seem to recall that from some time ago, and it is, when you look at our, I'm not sure the page number, but it's item 56, and the bar chart there is a very high figure. I think it's 31 million for CCLA property fund.
So you're talking about a limit that we set ourselves? We have a limit of, from Somerset County Council's point of view, we had a limit of 15 million, and we had a holding of 15 million. And when the legacy councils brought their holdings together, it came up to 31. So there's nothing we could do about that. So I mean, the limit is technically 31 million because that's what we hold.
Just clarify, it was our own limit as a county council. It was not a limit put on us by government or anyone else. Thank you.
No, not at all.
Thanks very much.
Okay, nothing else from lead members or associates. Go to Mandy. Mandy.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the paper. Always an enjoyable read, as Liz and I think. I don't know who else does, but we do. Just to ask a couple of questions on table 2, if I may. And the first is around the intra-unitary loans. So we've got a table there saying debt matured or repaid. It's a slightly unusual year this year, so we need a debt matured, repaid or quashed column just for this year only. But that's 53 million. But when I look at the total borrowing, actually, it's only come down by about 10 million. So are we effectively saying within that we've actually borrowed 40 million of new because the 53 has been quashed? That's my first question.
So we repaid 53, well, it was quashed debt, and we also had maturities of 213 of short term was paid back. So we, including that 53 million, 286 was matured, but we only took out 278. So no, we haven't taken on the extra. It's my understanding.
Sorry, that's not on reading the table, because if you've quashed 53 million from 323 to 324 and your borrowing effectively only dropped by 10 million, surely you must have borrowed an extra 43 million. And I think there was some PWLB debt taken for the general fund, 40 million in December, 20 million in January and the rest in March. I'm just trying to get the effect that one-off intra-unitary loans has had, because again, it's sort of skewing the figures slightly.
I don't know if it's helpful in the lead up to unitary, rather than people borrowing from the market per se, we actually did inter-authority borrow across the Somerset districts and county mainly, was where it was, because the county had surplus cash and the district had borrowing needs. So it was real debt. It could have been with somebody else, but it was with ourselves, as it were. So one side was the reduction in debt, the other side was the reduction in investment income, because obviously if the county council was lending to, they did lend to Sedgemoor, for instance, you would have seen in Sedgemoor's books they would have had the sort of debt. In the county council side, they would have had the investments. When we come together on 1st of April, effectively, those two sides have been taken out. So it is a once-off associated with our preparations for the unitary to put ourselves in the best financial position.
I get that. But if you've reduced in the columns by 53 million, you've got the minus coming out, debt matured, repaid, your borrowing, surely, if you hadn't taken out new borrowing, would have been minus 53 million.
Okay, Liz is going to have a go.
Replacement borrowing, yes, would have been a great deal better had Liz Truss not been Prime Minister. And if you want to know who's been sacked over that, she has.
Yeah, I wasn't being political. It's just a genuine question. But if you want to go there, I will. But I don't think it's appropriate. This is a serious meeting, a serious budget, and I hope it was a straightforward question.
The straightforward question is replacement borrowing. So that decrease in borrowing, there are minus and there are plus figures in there, and at the bottom it comes to what is a relatively small minus figure, but there is replacement borrowing, of course there is, and it did come in at a higher rate, of course it did.
It's a new borrowing. Thank you, that's all I needed.
Okay. Not seeing any other questions, comments or observations, so the recommendation is that we approve the report being in compliance with the CIPFA Code of Practice for Treasury Management and recommend it to full council at the next available meeting. Can I see a proposer, please? That's Liz Lyshon, seconded Ros Wyke. Those in favour, please. Those against. Thank you. Which moves us on to item 9, which is review and adoption of the productivity plan. This feels like having been set some homework and then we have a different teacher in front of the class when he comes down to in. Theo.
Just reading some coverage from when these were introduced about the panel that's going to review them all, chaired by Simon Hoare. I'm not convinced it is going to be chaired by Simon Hoare anymore. But whoever does chair it, I'm sure will do a fantastic job if they're listening. Yes, we were requested in April to produce a productivity productivity plan, as all local authorities were, by this Friday. So that's very interesting timing. It outlines essentially what we have done as a local authority to transform services, how we are going to make the most of digital opportunities. These are the things we're required to include. How we are going to clamp down on wasteful spending. But what I think the most interesting element of it is what the barriers are to productivity and what we think the actions government could be taking or should be taking in order to enable local authorities to do their jobs better. And the idea is that this is going to be reviewed across the piece and shape how the government treats local government going forward. Let's see if that happens or not. But the plan, I think, is a fairly comprehensive, although short one, fortunately, covering how we are going to create Somerset Council as a more flexible, agile, smaller, leaner, digital-enabled authority. It outlines a number of the actions that we have been taking, the transformation plan, the devolution plan. It makes particular reference to Bridgewater Town Council, although I would like to make some references also to Taunton Town Council, Yeovil Town Council, for the wonderful work that they have done and continue to do, and to the many other city, town and parish councils which have stepped up to the plate to become more involved with providing services and protecting services for their communities. It also makes reference to the work we're doing with the VCFSE sector, and I hope that that will develop in the future. I don't want to talk on all of the points that are covered in it because I suspect that colleagues around the room will want to speak about their particular areas. But I do want to make the point that we are asking for this to be adopted, but we are also delegating to the Executive Director, to Alan, in consultation with me, any minor amendments that we want to make. And I suspect that colleagues may wish to add one or two suggestions during the course of this debate. So I'll be making a note of those, and I'm sure others will be making note of those to see if there are any things that need to be incorporated as we go forward. I'll hand over to Alan.
Thank you, Theo. Thank you, Chair. I'll be incredibly brief, just to say that we have followed the guidance and structure associated with the productivity plan. That has necessitated its brevity. What we've also done is including links where we have previous information that can be used and assessed by government, so that we are really clear about where we are drawing this information from. In addition, we've gone through a series of steps of using published information wherever possible and making sure that it references back to the original decisions made by either executive or council to support the development of this. So each of these steps have a cornerstone, if you like, a hook within our constitution and governance, so that we can evidence these steps that are being taken. Other than that, just to say that we have met the guidelines of sticking within roughly 4 to 5 pages for this information. So again, forgive the brevity, but it is intended to be direct and quite clear on some of the issues. And in addition, this will form part of our engagement now with new departments and new ministries as they become established and their leaders established. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Theo. Thank you, Alan. Ros and then Liz.
Thank you. Appreciate the need for brevity and appreciate the limit on the number of pages. However, this is a important document as we lay out what we want from the new government, and therefore I think, Alan, you should have received from officers within Climate in Place a number of amendments, because I think these are really important, but we spell out exactly and be more specific. And I hope you'll be able to include them. I would also like to add to the list, if I may, one thing which really affects productivity in Somerset is the areas where they don't have fast broadband. And we are singularly failing a large number of people in the northern part of the county on broadband, and we need to have an answer which is actually specific rather than anything else. Secondly, I welcome having a very specific ask around phosphates, because this is something which is having a significant impact on the productivity and also the well-being of the people in Somerset if we can't build houses. And the third thing I would like to point out is that prior to Brexit, this council, along with many other councils, received significant long-term funding from the EU. This was promised to be replaced by the equivalent funding. This then turned into the UK Prosperity Fund of very limited nature for only 2 years on an even shorter spending scale, because they announced the fund, they then didn't actually give us any details and then told us we had to spend it by March 25. And the UK Prosperity Fund is the only fund with some capital and some revenue to actually significantly help economic development within the county. And I think we need to be very clear that we are expecting a continuation of the replacement EU funding into particularly the areas outside the urban areas of the county, of the country, to actually help deliver productivity. And this is really quite critical. So while I appreciate you have limited space, we do need to spell this out quite specifically in terms of some of the asks. And I think my colleagues have already sent you something, and no doubt there'll be some more further thoughts in the next day or so. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a specific question actually. On page 194, under adult social care transformation, item 13, there's a bullet point that says saving £500 weekly. And that as a figure on its own looks rather strange. And I just wondered if that could be explained a bit better. Otherwise, somebody's going to look at this and say you're going to need a lot more than £500 a week to sort out that council.
Mel.
What that actually means is 500 a week less. So children coming through transition, where we're working with them earlier, we're saving per person £500 a week each as part of that transformation programme. So one of our transformation was around making sure that children coming through transition, we work within an appropriate way, and that's some of the savings you're getting. We've also got a dedicated learning disability team now, and therefore when we're reviewing individuals, when we're working differently with them, we're saving money by doing things better, by getting people's outcomes better for them, and by ensuring they're as independent as possible.
Could we just ask for the wording to be adjusted to make it more in proportion with the budget of the council? And could I pass on my thanks, because I find this a really useful report, and I do understand it's taken a lot of work for officers to get us to this point. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got Heather, Sarah and Fed to come. Heather, please.
Thank you. Yes, my thanks to the officer doing this one. To get all of this in, particularly the actual productivity plan itself in 5 pages, is no mean feat. You've got a few lines left at the bottom of page 5, and I expect we'll take them up. I'll always come and chop some words out if you want to afterwards. I quite like chopping words out. But I think there's a couple of things I want to say on page 197. I think it's probably already been picked, and I'm sure Ros will have picked this one up in some of these places. But I think under the devolution, levelling up and local growth, bullets 2 and 3, obviously for brevity, I don't really know what they mean. Now, I don't, as long as the reader knows what that means, but I would like to see a little bit more kind of detail in that to understand it. And similarly with the housing, infrastructure and transport, it did feel like we kind of tailed off at the end to go, oh, we're running out of our 5th page. Let's get all of these things. And it covers a lot of things, I imagine, in that housing, infrastructure and transport. That's where I'd have expected to have seen perhaps things like the broadband that Ros mentioned and things like that. So, you know, support through legislative reform and strategic investments it's the world. So it's whether you've got the space to expand. But my last one as well, just to mention, it probably covers adult social care, children's and probably public health, although there's not a heading for public health, which is the idea about making explicit the need for community-based early help initiatives to be supported. Over the years, way years back, we've lost a lot of those community-based initiatives to support families and children, the finance for them, and for us to do it, we're expecting to do it all through the voluntary sector with our support for not very much money. So I thought if we could have something maybe explicitly about early help, I think that would be useful. Thank you.
Excellent. I think we may be about to reduce the margins and decrease the font size with these suggestions, but we'll carry on. We've got Sarah, Fed and Dixie. Sarah, please.
Yeah, just briefly again on adult social care. It does say we need national funding. We do need national funding reform, but we are doing so much work in the council, which I know has always been referred to, in order just simply to stay afloat. We are doing earlier help. We are providing Somerset Independent Living Centres for people to go and get gadgets and other advice about how to manage in their own homes. We are doing reablement, and we are doing the transition for young people to adults in the 17, which is much earlier than we were doing, which is bearing fruit too, as well as our peer reforms and all the rest of it that's going on. So there's a lot going on, but I think that the next thing that needs to happen, and that is what people might be interested to know, what I am planning, is a promotion program for not just members, but for the general public, so that they understand better what is on offer from adult social care, what they can get and what they can access at an earlier stage, so that we try and prevent people ending up in a position they don't want to be, or they wouldn't choose to be had they had earlier help and access to what's available. So we're doing all that, and that's great for productivity and for cutting down the need for people to go into homes as far as possible and stay at home as long as possible. But we do need a national funding settlement. It just isn't going to work if we carry on like this.
Thank you, Sarah. Fed.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just pick up on one point that Councillor Shearer raised in relation to preventative. I think it would be really good to put something in there around that early prevention and provision in children's. I feel sometimes that we are seeing at present the increase in our spend in certain areas because of the closure of children's centres over a decade ago, and that actually if we could look to come in with preventative measures, we may look to then support those families at an earlier stage. For me, if we were to looking at that final page, it does feel that the housing, infrastructure and transport tails off. I'm not sure if I'm looking at a previous version, but it would be all well and good if we get productivity great in Somerset, but where we face a housing crisis and we don't have places for people to live or that they can afford to rent, that is no good for anybody. So something around building social housing and affordable homes and tackling the phosphate crisis that would unlock opportunities across the county, both in the east and south, where we don't have the housing revenue account, I think then helps productivity grow.
Thank you, Fed. I've got Dixie, Richard, and then Ros back again. Dixie, please.
Thanks. And again, I appreciate the need to be really succinct in this, but I think the climate change and net zero paragraph needs some stronger wording. So we need to make it clear that we need national intervention to achieve our targets. It does mention active travel and public transport, but we also need a funding roadmap for retrofit, including kickstarting skills and the supply chain. We need a clear remit around renewables and energy efficiency in planning. And I'm wondering if a short way of doing that is under housing, infrastructure and transport. If we could add something in about net zero and sustainability would be a shorthand way of addressing those issues, because the problem with climate change is it's sort of spread over everything, isn't it really? So that might be a way to do that. But in the climate change and net zero bit, if we could put in the word resilience, that would be really helpful, because we've got such a flooding, we are so susceptible to flooding. And if at all possible, I would also like something about unified messaging, because I think that's what we've really been missing. And I think kind of politically and with other organisations, we need to come together to make clear to the public that climate change is a really serious issue and we absolutely need to act on it. So that's not asking for money really, that's asking for voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Dixie. Richard.
I'm just going to add to Ros's list of asks really, but it does fit neatly in with what Dixie was asking for, and that is that we put pressure on National Grid for more connections. It really will enable better sustainable energy, and it's something that we're actually quite good at in Somerset with Hinkley Point and the new satisfactory, but it's something that still needs to be looked at more holistically. So if that could be included, I would appreciate that.
Thank you, Richard. Also chime in with off of what the Greater South West has been saying around that as well. So briefly again, Ros, and then.
Thank you. I just think how we position this document. I appreciate your responding to the last government's request for the productivity and the barriers. But I also think that we need to need to think about who is receiving it. And I think how we position our requests need to be aligned with the Labour manifesto. And we just need to really think through how we position the requests and how they will resonate with the new government. Thank you.
Okay, I think that will be a linguistic and stylistic change. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's lead members and associates done. Any other comments from around the room? I hope that's been useful guidance. So we've got recommendations that we agree and adopt the plan as shown in Appendix A prior to submission to, and we need to change DLUC, don't we? What's DLUC called now? MHCLG. So we'll take that drafting amendment, please, and subsequent publishing on the council's internet site. Executive are asked to delegate authority to the Executive Director of Strategy, Workforce and Localities in consultation with the lead member for Transformation and Human Resources to make minor amendments prior to submission. I think that proposed, please. Seconded. Theo Burt-Philip and Ros White. Those in favour? Those against? That's clearly carried. We've been going for 2 hours and 20 minutes. I'm going to suggest we have a 10-minute break now for refreshment and comfort. Thank you. Right, good afternoon, folks, and we're back to it, running an hour late according to the schedule I have. So apologies for that, but we've had some absolutely crucial items on our agenda to make sure we got them right. So item 10, we're moving on to the Yeovil Devolution Programme, and Councillor Ros White is going to be introduced, please.
Thank you, Chair. The paper you have in front of you is something which I think you've all seen in part over the last few months. It is part of the overall plan for devolution of services and assets to the town and parish councils, and of course the city too. We particularly have been focusing in on Yeovil because A, there is a considerable number of assets for discussion, and secondly, there are some critical ones in terms of where we go with both Westlands and indeed the Octagon Theatre. The Yeovil Town Council has really stepped up to the challenge of taking on quite a range of services, the services which are really important to the people of Yeovil. And I'm very grateful for their willingness to be flexible and understanding of where we are going. I do recognise that they're quite complex, and while the services we hope will transfer, if we agree this paper today, fairly promptly, inevitably there will be things which will take some time to follow. The officers of Somerset Council have taken pains both to discuss at great length the detail and also to give assurances to the Town Council that we're not just walking away, we're going to be supporting them through the process and making sure that the services which the people of Yeovil depend on will continue. We have with us today the officer who's led the discussions, and I will hand over to her. But I just really want to reassure everyone that this is going to be the first of many papers we'll see coming to executive as the services and assets of the council return to, in many cases, the town and city and parish councils of Somerset Council. I'll hand over to Liz Dawson at this stage.
Thank you, Liz.
Okay, so yeah, just to say, I'm the senior responsible officer for the devolution deal with Yeovil Town Council. In the room today, we have Stephen Hellard, who is the lead for legal. We've got Dan Webb, which is the programme lead, and we've got Ollie Woodhams, the assets lead, and we've also got Rachel River, the HR lead. So we have put together a slide pack, which we've presented before. So that does contain all of the timescales and the individual detail on all of the individual projects. So the service and assets that we're looking to transfer. Ros has already said, but we are proposing a service and staff devolution for the 1st of August. And that will be circa around 32 permanent jobs, 90 casual staff and 90 volunteers. And the asset or the services in their entirety are circa about 5 million annual turnover per annum. And there will be 11 services / assets with a saving to the authority of circa about £500,000 a year. But there will probably be further savings from corporate support that we've not identified yet. So yeah, we've provided all of the detail in the report, and if you have any questions, then I'm really quite happy to answer them. But furthermore, we have other officers in the room if there are any other questions that need answering.
Thank you, Liz. Just looking around the room for lead members or associate lead members who wish to comment further. Personally, just want to reiterate my thanks to Yeovil Town Council for stepping forward and supporting their residents and Somerset Council in the devolution of these services and assets. It is absolutely valued, and in the same breath, also mention our other city, town, and parish councils, most notably Bridgewater and Jonathan, but also Frome and Burnham and so on, that have stepped forward to work in this area. It really is hugely appreciated. We've got Councillor Andy Soughton, who's the leader of Yeovil Town Council online, and I'll go straight to Andy first and then come back to Mandy in the room.
Thank you, Chair. My question really is relating to the 2 Brimpton councillors that are listed as local members. I just wondered why the Brimpton councillors have been listed as such.
I think that might be Michael Sandy, because it turned to the country park. After the boundary goes into the neighbouring parish. And we felt they needed to be looped in on a conversation because of that little in the boundary that's there. I appreciate the divisional boundary and the parish boundaries are not coterminous. I hope that answers the question, Andy.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy.
Thank you. There's a generic question really, because as we've heard, obviously more of these papers coming forward, so welcome. Some of the assets will presumably in time be actually handed over lock, stock and barrel, and some I suppose we will hold on to, and perhaps just the services are devolved. So my question is, I suppose, if we do hand over lock, stock and barrel buildings, how will that be dealt with in terms of the financial side, the due diligence that they have the capacity and the resilience to manage and hold on to them, and presumably there'll be a write down in our books, i.e. the value of what we are talking about. And my third part of that is, presumably if money has been spent on that building by us over the year, or there are loans and things in place, I'm just wondering how we deal with that whole plethora generally, because I think we'll see more to come on that.
Okay, Councillor. So is it Liz Dawson responding? Liz.
Okay, so when we set out on the journey to have discussions with Yeovil Town Council, they were very clear around their budget setting. So they've built contingency into their budget setting in relation to a asset devolution rather than a service and staff devolution. So the deal was always started as an asset devolution. So they've built in capacity and budget for that. So in relation to some of your other questions around specifically the buildings themselves, got Ollie Woodhams here that can probably answer some of those questions, but as I say, the whole premise of the actual deal was built around the asset devolution to start with.
Thanks, Liz. So just building on the point about due diligence and safe transfer of assets, we're working very closely with the Yeovil Town Council on this deal and other local councils in other areas to make sure that the sort of servicing records and maintenance of assets are handed over seamlessly, and we're sort of ready to stand by either with buyback arrangements or support to through a transitional period, just to make sure that buildings continue to be safe for users and well maintained, and that's well underway in Yeovil at the moment. On the sort of financial treatment of assets, I think Nikki or Jason's probably better placed to comment on that, so I'll hand over to them. But it's worth noting that we are doing very comprehensive valuations of all of these assets, so we understand the value both from a legal perspective, because we have to under the Local Government Act, but also for members as well, and that work is ongoing.
Thank you, Chair. So we are working very closely with Yeovil Town Council. I'm not sure if Yeovil Town Council's chief executive is a qualified accountant and did actually used to work at Somerset County Council. So I think she's got some knowledge of the assets that she is inheriting, especially as they come from some of them from South Somerset as well, where she was also one of the accountants. So we're working very closely in terms of them understanding some of the implications and kind of the services that are being inherited, and then we'll work closely in terms of removing all of those costs and income from our budgets and the assets in terms of how they are then positioned on our balance sheet in terms of being devolved out to them. And those will all the transactions will go through our accounts for that nature. Is that okay?
And if we are disposing, or when I say disposing, handing over, presumably anything costs in the past and investments in the past, I always thought that came back onto the books. Is that not the case with these scenarios? I'm just trying to understand how that works.
So there is an outstanding loan on, which was an internal loan that South Somerset had, which was for the Westlands. So when Westlands was refurbished, they took out an internal loan, and all of that will be passive because that loan is actually just repaid from the income. So that we will deal with that in terms of them taking that on and then dealing with that through the accounts. That's the only one that I can think of in terms of the loans outstanding.
Thank you. It's just quite complicated. I think every area will have a slightly different story and slightly different working. And I'm just hoping somebody's capturing that really well. Because if you look at this 10, 15, 20 years down the line, you know, those agreements that are made, it's really important they're captured and stay there ad infinitum almost, really.
Thank you. You're absolutely correct. Every town will be different, and not only that, but each of the assets will be different, particularly if we're transferring them. So, for instance, the county park in Yeovil has multiple different leases and agreements and arrangements. I think the leader referred to the fact that part of it is actually in another area, in another parish as well. And these will take time. And I will just say, just so that I know other towns and parishes are anxious to have their devolution assets and services high up the agenda. But we just need to make sure that we do it well and do it effectively for the future. So both legal and assets teams are really stretched, and it will take time to cover every single element of devolution, but we're trying to do it town by town in a very methodical, phased way to make sure that we do it as well as possible for the future. Because we all know seeing a deed 50 years old and you think, how the hell do they do that? But hopefully we won't prevent that in the future.
Councillor Martin Wale.
Yes, good morning. I think it was partly answered, but is the negotiation within all this, the handover of these operational services, in whether they are a Yeovil-based total or they are rather a Somerset facility, i.e. the Yeovil Recreation Centre, for instance. That is recognised certainly within the whole of South Somerset and as the only track and field place and has national recognition for this. Is when we are devolving these services, is there some do we take into account the fact that they are not just for Yeovil residents, but they are in fact for the whole of the local Somerset and Dorset, in some cases, area? And how is that worked out? The same would apply, of course, to the Octagon, but I noticed that's not in this report, although it was mentioned by the portfolio holder. Thank you.
Your point is well made that the geographic footprint of many of the assets and services is beyond just the parish council or city or town council in which they sit. I was particularly struck by when we first looked at proposals for Yeovil Rec, how many of the people who came to speak to us were residents of Dorset, and I did ask Councillor Spencer Flower, the leader of Dorset, whether he was prepared to chip in, but sadly, he was not able to help. We are in this very difficult situation in local government where I feel that those sorts of choices do have to be made, and I'm sure if any other organisation or council wishes to contribute to Yeovil Town Council, they won't be coy. Anybody else want to pick the question? Oh, I've kind of bossed that one, and it's not even my area. No. Liz, you want to?
So again, when we set out on the devolution programme with Yeovil, we worked really closely with Clark there. So we were really clear that whilst the services and the assets might sit within Yeovil, the need for continued partnership working with us and other organisations to make sure that these assets and services are still accessible to the whole of Somerset. And you mentioned Dorset as well, and those are discussions that we've had, and we meet on a regular basis, and we've got a really strong, good working relationship with Yeovil to try and maintain that, and that will continue after the devolution because there's other work that we're looking to achieve.
Thank you, Chair.
And just to note in the report, the South West Heritage Trust is party to the discussions and in fact will be taking responsibility for the South Somerset Heritage collection. And the Town Council have taken responsibility to ensure that it's available to the people of Yeovil. But at the end of the day, long term, the responsibility will be with the Heritage Trust, again ensuring the longevity of any decision we've made.
Thank you, Ros. Move next to Councillor Tony Locke. Good afternoon, Tony.
Good afternoon, Bill. I won't put my camera on. All sorts of things been happening here this morning.
I can only imagine, Tony.
I'd like to just echo what Andy Saunton has said sort of in the past, and that is the leader of the town council, that a lot of hard work has been put in by officers of both authorities, and Yeovil Town Council has a very hands-on approach with what is required for these facilities, as they've probably been able to assist Somerset Council's officer team with these facilities and the requirements and everything else. I listened to what Martin said there, and quite interested that yes, these are facilities for the whole area and for everyone to use, as is the country park and that. And as you so eloquently put, and I would just add another little bit in on it, Bill, and that is that any contributions from any users or authorities whose residents use those facilities would be greatly welcomed. We have not asked for them at the moment, though we would welcome contributions, but probably at this moment in time, it is best that just one authority moves forward and does negotiations with our Somerset Council Authority to get all these in the timescales which is required, and to save any money in the waters of what have been a very, very complex situation, and still is and still will be. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Tony. Very good points, well made. And we do fully appreciate everything that the staff at both this council and Yeovil Town Council have made to be able to get this over the line on a tight deadline. So hugely appreciated. I'm not seeing any further hands, which moves us on to recommendations, which conveniently aren't on the hymn sheet. They're on an appendix on here, which are, yeah, I've got them, which are to devolve the operational services and staff relating to the following Somerset Council assets: Yeovil Rec, including the cafe; Yeovil Country Park, including the cafe; Westlands Entertainment Venue, and the South Somerset Heritage Collection, to Yeovil Town Council in line with the council's adopted asset and services devolution framework from the 1st of August 2024 to transfer the existing equipment used by Somerset Council to deliver those services, which will become surplus unless the Yeovil Town Council don't want them from the 1st of August 2024, and to delegate authority to the service director in consultation with the lead member to agree the transfer or grant of rights over the following land and property on appropriate terms as soon as practically possible on or after the 1st of August, provided the interim head of legal services is satisfied. That's the land at Milford Road, the former Monmouth Hall stall, Yeovil Recreation Centre and Cafe, Yeovil Country Park and 90 Springs Cafe, Westlands Entertainment Venue sublease, and part of the Lufton Depot housing the South Somerset Heritage Collection, and to grant such licences or leases to Yeovil Town Council to occupy the land and premises currently used by Somerset Council to deliver the devolved services at those venues, and enable them to deliver the devolved services as if they were the owners of that land and premises. Do I see a proposer for that? Councillor White, seconded Councillor Wilkins. Those in favour, those against, that's clearly carried. Thank you very much to all the officers who've been working so incredibly hard on this. We've been receiving regular updates to make sure we get this over the line, and we work in a collaborative way with Yeovil Town Council, and reiterate our massive thanks for my apologies. Reiterate our massive thanks to Yeovil Town Council for their contribution to this situation.
Thank you. The paper in front of you is actually phase 2 of a very long journey as we, following vesting day, rationalise our assets, particularly our office accommodation across the whole of Somerset. What we have in front of us is a detailed report, because quite considerable effort was put into consulting with staff and unions, getting an understanding of the requirements of the council as we go forward in terms of office accommodation in Somerset, and also recognising both Dean House and the County Hall estate and what services we can or couldn't provide. The outcome of all the research and the discussions were in 3 parts. One is the actual level of accommodation here in Dean House is such that it couldn't totally replace the needs for the council from the County Hall site. Secondly, I think people recognise that we have a tenant in terms of the police here at Dean House. And thirdly, we have now successfully, and it's quite an achievement, to actually have potential tenants on the 2nd and 1st floor. And the proposal in front of you will see 2 things. First of all, a revenue situation for the next 5 years of over £500,000 coming in, which will help the budget. And secondly, we will be making some savings in terms of running this building However, we will be responsible for the facilities management here, and of course, the ground floor will still stay at this stage the information point for the public. So what you've got is, I think, a huge amount of work, a lot of consideration, and the one thing in here which will need to be played out over the next few months is the undertaking we've given the staff, but we will look at B block on the County Hall estate and see if we can further improve the working conditions for the staff. We will be taking some of the furniture and the various things which we have here, which people appreciate, and there will be a short-term temporary situation as staff will move into Block A while we do some of the refurbishment work, which will be covered in year costs to ensure that Block B becomes a really effective and enjoyable working offer to our staff. Number of the team are here, and I'll hand over to particularly Ollie Woodhams if he wants to add anything to my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Wyke. I think, as Councillor Wyke said, there's a lot of detail in the report, and I won't go into that. I just wanted to lift out probably 2 points. One is that this is a step on our journey of property rationalisation as a new council. So we will be looking at other sites, both within Taunton. We'll be looking at A block at some point in the future, at the shape of our customer services offer in Taunton as well. At some point in the future, and of course working with One Public Estate partners on co-location opportunities both in Taunton and elsewhere in the county, and what that means for our other sites and ways of working. So there's a lot of work to come as well, but we hope the report shows that the analysis is that this is the right step to be taking and the right direction to be going. The second point I wanted to draw out really, and it's contained in one of the risks, risk 3, is the impact on staff and other users of this building from this decision. So the decision to relocate staff to take this opportunity will be a really difficult change for people at a point in time when there's a lot of difficult change happening around the organisation. And I wanted to thank both the people who've been involved in the consultation, both the project team, Sian Powell has been involved in that, and Sarah, who's no longer with us, and also the trade unions and managers and all the staff have engaged. We had over 700 responses to our questionnaire on this. And also my thanks to the managers and staff who, subject to the decision today, will be relocating, and who, for whom that will be difficult. We'll try and make it as easy as possible, but they don't need that at this time. And I think it's quite a difficult thing to do to organise, and also emotionally quite a difficult thing to do as well. And I wanted to recognise that here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Councillor Dodge. Thanks, Stacey.
I think, like lots of other people, I really like Teen House. So this kind of, you know, it doesn't kind of feel, I'm not looking forward to this. Reading this document, it's the plans are a little bit messy because we can't move into Block B straight away. But I have to say, it really does look, looking at the document, as if all of the options have been explored really, really thoroughly. And this is the kind of a compromise. I think the key things for me that support it are the point on I think on page 203 about the challenge in finding tenants as we move forward, and the fact that we have got some tenants, that's too good an opportunity to miss. And the projected savings are really significant, and that will help us in 25-26. My question really is just a really kind of practical one, and that is, if we are still using Dean House on certain days for meetings, is there any kind of breakout space, or do we need to cluster in the car park to talk about a meeting outside? So, and that maybe that's in there and I missed it, I don't know, but
Yeah, we will be retaining the ground floor space we have here, and that will provide some working space for people who are administering meetings here and also those supporting our customer services teams. How much that space provides for people who are attending large committees like this remains to be seen. I think we have to sort of rethink the way we work here. We will obviously have the use of all of these rooms, the 2 committee rooms as well. So there's opportunities for sort of breakout space and touchdown space there as well. But I think we have to think that through and try to make it work.
Looks like Morrison's might be getting some extra custom.
Other supermarkets are available. Heather.
Thank you. Now, I just want to go back to the I guess the kind of staff and the lessons learned from experience in Dean House. So I'm really pleased that we're being as careful and as considerate for the staff who have to move as we can possibly be. I think that's really important. And I think as well, you know, I know the kind of the density of like floor space use here. It's rather lovely. It is very lovely, and that'd be hard to replicate. But I get a sense from the report that we're going to try to do as much as we can to replicate some of the look and feel, but also the kind of facilities in B block that we've got here, because I think that is quite important. I don't have a problem with B block, but I'm there for 5 minutes a week. So if you're there all the time, it can feel quite, I think, quite kind of full, and also it's a little tireder than some places. So I think if we can, yeah, it's great to, and it's messy to move twice, but it's better to move into A block and then do some proper refurbishment in B to actually get the best out of it that we possibly can. And I guess, I guess that has been, I guess we've been asking for people's input as to what that might look like, because again, it's that use of small rooms or the availability of small rooms and where people sit.
Just to reassure you, the staff have been and will continue to be consulted through the refurbishment of B block. You must remember that is the building which we have invested a considerable amount of money already as part of the decarbonisation of the estate. So already the more expensive and the more basic things about the building have been resolved, and now we need to get a feel and the right furnishings accordingly.
Thank you. I like Dixie, are quite attached to this building, and I like the modern outlook. I know it's a 1980s building, however, the 1960s building of County Hall is pretty ugly, and if I was working somewhere, I would prefer to work here, and I have worked previously in County Hall. So I think it's a shame. I think it's perhaps sending out the wrong message that we were going to be different to the existing previous administration, that we were going to base ourselves there. However, I understand the financial implications and the reasoning behind that. My question was, I don't know if I've missed it in the report regarding parking. Now, when I came here, and I was running a bit late because I'd left my laptop at home and had to go back and fetch it, it was pretty full here, and that's with staff and with us here. So how are staff who have currently got a reasonable amount of car parking separate to what's used for the swimming pool and shoppers, where are they going to park that'll be easy? And also for councillors when we turn up, because I don't think we can use the Crescent car park. So are we expected to use further afield for some of the parking? Because I know there's still some around the Shire Hall, but that's a bit of a mishmash as well. If you could perhaps explain that a bit more. Thank you.
On parking, there was a presentation to all members about the move. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people missed it. I'll ask for it to be, everyone reminded, it was recorded and you can hear that, about where people are going to park. And if you want some specific details, I'm conscious of the time. I could go into them, or a member of the staff can, but to be assured, the people who park here, the staff, are moving across, and there are no changes to whether their eligibility for parking. And councillors will continue to have opportunities to park at County Hall. And of course, there is the space up by the court as well. So I think we should be all right. Certainly the modelling shows that. but and was quite carefully considered by both the staff and the unions as part of the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any other lead members or associates. Any other members wish to comment? Not seeing anything in the room or online. Oh, Lucy, my apologies.
And that's okay, Chair. So it's only a quick question. I too missed the briefing. It seems to say in here something about we're keeping, well, I don't know, because, but are we keeping the customer contact point here and not having one at County Hall anymore? And if that's the case, are people going to be very clearly signposted because people are going to be making journeys thinking the council is back in County Hall to be sent over here? What's the transport like? And are we going to be signposting and announcing this so that people understand where they need to go in Taunton if they wish to meet somebody from the council?
It's actually a continuation of what they're doing at the moment. So while I recognise that inevitably people may not know, and there is signposting and they'll be improved, and we will maybe in due course be reconsidering, as we've done in other places, considering the use of the library as a potential customer point, but at this time we're keeping the same services as they are at the moment, i.e. this building on the ground floor. And I'm not sure that it's actually now a point of much confusion. You want to add anything?
No, yeah, there is signage for customers, and occasionally people do turn up. I understand at B block or A block, but there's signage explaining that the customer service point is here, and nothing about this proposal will change that.
Okay, so if we can move to the recommendations. So I've been advised of a slight drafting amendment to what's published. So the recommendations that the executive approves the case for the council to enter into lease/license agreements with two local partners to take accommodation at Dean House, Taunton, as set out in the business case in Appendix A. That we delegate authority to the service director and head of estates in consultation with the lead member to enter into and complete the lease or license agreements. So it would add the word lease, and coordinate necessary resource to implement the decision, and delegates authority to the service director to authorise expenditure as identified in the business case to remodel B block at County Hall using a proportion of the income from the first year of the licence or lease. That will the amended wording would say. Agrees to relocate impacted staff from Dean House to County Hall, implementing revised parking arrangements as agreed via collective consultation with the trade unions. And we didn't need section 5 because we didn't need to go into confidential session. Okay, I have a proposer, Councillor White, seconded by Councillor Shearer. And those in favour, please. Those against? Thank you, that's clearly carried. We move on to our update on waste services, which is pages 253 to 250. Members should note that the main part of the report is non-confidential, but should we need to go into any of the commercial details of these contracts, we would need to go into private session by passing a resolution to exclude the press and the public. Okay. Councillor Dixie Darch to introduce.
Thank you. So at the last executive meeting, we discussed the challenges of the sewers contract resulting from their disclosure that they're making really significant losses and the risk to us that they could walk away from the contract with only 3 months' notice. A great deal of work has gone on into exploring other options, including bringing the service in-house, setting up a LATCO, an arm's length company, and retendering, and all of these have proved to be more expensive. So this report asks for agreement to delegate authority to the head of legal to bring into effect the decision to increase annual payments to sewers, starting with an additional 3 million this financial year. Sewers will continue to make a loss, but not to the same extent. And if I can hand over to Kirsty Larkins, she's going to give you some more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Darch. I've got a few short slides to run through with members, just to provide some brief background. So as you'll be aware, the contract at the moment is circa £24 million with sewers per year. It commenced in April 2020, possibly the worst time to commence a contract, given that shortly afterwards COVID hit, and it runs for 10 years with an option to extend. Obviously, the services are critical to the council and to its residents and support the council plan priority for greener Somerset. During that time, there was a competitive tendering process run by Somerset Waste Partnership. There was also strong governance in place, member involvement and scrutiny involvement. Late last year and early this year, Sewers disclosed to us that they had significant losses on the contract and have asked us to amend the contract and increase payments, otherwise they may seek to terminate the contract. They only have to give us 3 months' notice. They have indicated they would work in partnership if that's the route we wish to take and give longer, but obviously that would be at a cost to the council. As I've mentioned, there's been several commercial challenges since the start, not least COVID, followed by a national driver shortage, inflation, and also there was an underestimated of the complexity of our contract. We are a huge geographic area with a lot of rural areas and obviously some urban areas. So these are the recommendations set out in the paper. I won't go through them because you have them in front of you. But it's worth mentioning the options analysis work that's gone on in the background. So we appointed some technical consultants to review and verify the figures that Sewers had provided to us and also to assess alternative delivery models. We also had an internal steering group made up of legal, procurement, finance and waste services officers. So a huge amount of work has gone into this across the organisation, not just within the waste team. The options considered were the local authority trading company, a direct labour organisation, reprocurement and renegotiation. Some of the key outcomes from that were the lead-in times. Should we look at an alternative model, we're looking at around at least 12 months to develop and deploy those alternatives, more likely 18 months to 2 years. During that time, there would be an additional cost from Sewers to continue managing the service. They had stated they would not run at a loss during that period. Having assessed all options that are available to us, they are all more expensive than the existing arrangements. There is not a cost neutral option, unfortunately. Having renegotiated with Sewers over several months, they are the most financially favourable outcome, and they also provide continuity of service to our residents. So as mentioned previously, the costs, if we were to look at an alternative, would place significant pressure on us. We'd be mobilising within a very short time frames, and the legal aspects in early termination and retrospective claims would be extremely challenging. So prior to Sewers explaining that they were making losses on the contract, there were a number of claims made under the dispute resolution process. There are some risks associated with settlement, and I think we need to be clear on those. So the additional contract payments are set out in detail in both the public and the confidential paper. We will need to make a modification to the contract, and that will need to be published, and that may lead to market challenge. We think the risk is very low of that market challenge, but obviously if it does happen, the consequences are high, the impacts are high. So it's important to be clear on that. So that concludes where we are, and obviously you have the recommendations and on the paper. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dixie, and thank you, Kirsty. Comments or questions from lead members or associates first? Councillor Roswike first.
I appreciate that there's been huge amount of effort put into this, and I recognise that you've worked very hard to mitigate all the impacts. But as you alluded to, there is a potential impact of challenge in the marketplace. Are we carrying all the risk on that, or is there an element of cover from the other party to the contract?
So we don't have an element of cover from Suez. It will be for us to defend as we are awarding the contract effectively.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sarah Wakefield.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you to the team for the huge amount of work they've done on this. You know, nobody should underestimate dealing with a large commercial, excuse me, foreign-owned company is an easy thing to do. And I think the sense that we can't revisit the fact that they may have underassessed the value of the contract when they did it. Of course, lots of things have happened as well to make it less viable, I'm sure, with difficulty in drivers as one of them, I know. But I think this proposed solution is a really excellent one for the council and for them as well, even though I don't think it completely solves their financial problems, but I think it means that the service, which we generally, I believe, think is a good service we get from this this provider, and you know, generally people's bins and recycling are properly dealt with, that you know, should continue. And I'm very hopeful that under this arrangement it will be able to, I hope and believe, that there will be sufficient safeguards built in to stop a similar pushback happening from them as we go through the rest of the contract. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Sarah. I think, you know, that with the negotiations that has been in mind, that ensuring that this doesn't happen further down the line. So tapered payments and increasing the penalty for kind of coming out. The other thing I just wanted to say in reference to the quality of service, sewers collect 385,000 from households a week. It is an absolutely massive operation, and I usually hear about the missed collections, so I know all about them. And you know, actually, in the scheme of things, there aren't that many. But one of the negotiations that our officers have managed to carry out is a kind of an increased penalty for repeated missed collections, because they're the ones that really make people cross. I think they're okay when your bin isn't collected, you know, it's missed for one week, the recycling, but when you get these little pockets where they're repeatedly missed, people understandably get very, very upset. So there'll be an incentive for that not to happen. So there's been some kind of fine tuning, and I know that this end result, and I don't deny that the figures are large, but compared to where we started from, this is kind of quite a good end to it.
Thank you, Dixie. My residents in Mill Bay and Banklands will be delighted to hear about the penalties for repeated miscollection. Ros.
Thank you. I just wonder, just broadening it beyond this contract, we do have some quite sizable contracts as a council, and I just wondered whether or not we need to stand back and look at our procurement process, both for the very large contract and maybe for some of the smaller ones. Procurement is a very skilled business. I know from my NHS experience where they went into quite a review of procurement within the NHS and made some substantial changes. I just think that we as a council need to step back and see if there's anything else we can learn, both from this contract, but more broadly about our approach to contracts going forward.
I'd just like to say that procurement is, the rules on procurement are being looked at and will be changing in November, is that right? So that's probably something where we will be looking quite strongly at procurement anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also a piece around the national market in waste collection as well. My understanding is that there aren't that many big players, so effectively they have a monopolistic power, and where that power is motivated by foreign investors, as I think may be the case in this point. Who knows what impact that has across the country? It's I think that's a wider point that we could perhaps raise with colleagues in LGA, and just see whether there's some lobbying we can do with government about making sure that if we've got a process that involves that's supposed to involve competition, that there is actually competition in the market. Anybody got anything else they wish to add? Mandy.
Thank you. Apologies, I should have moved it first. Couple of questions and concerns, I suppose, and one's around the last risk there that, you know, are we going to see a similar approach to some other contracts? I think most large bids, they try to be as competitive as they can, understandably, when bidding, which often leaves a small margin when other pressures are seen in the market, which is what we're seeing here. I suppose, so my question is, will we see more of this moving forwards? And the second question is around, this is going to put a further pressure, as we've read from the papers, on next year and the year after. I'm just wondering at what point that will feed into our sort of MTFS. Thank you.
Who would like to take those? Jason.
So this, along with other pressures and other updates and other savings, will be built into the MTFS and the MTFP as we start to do those forecasts going forward. That paper was due to come to executive, I think it's September, but bearing in mind the changes at 151 level, I think that'll be October. That will be built into the numbers.
Okay, on the first point, I think it's around the point is also around the regulation of the markets that I was trying to make earlier. That if we have unregulated markets in which we've got monopolistic power, we are in a very difficult situation as an authority, and we're exposed to that. And that's where we need to work with other authorities to make sure that that's not happening. And without wanting to go open up a whole new rabbit warren, I'm thinking of the influence of private equity in children's homes at the moment, which is causing significant financial strain across the sector. I think those are issues which we could raise through our CCN and LGA channels. But yeah, the point is well made.
Thank you. And being super transparent, probably not needed, but my niece works for Suez in another county. But just to be ultra transparent, no connection to this, but I felt it was best to mention it. Thank you.
Thanks for that disclosure. Okay, I see no further hands, so we return to the recommendation. We did not need to go into private session. So it's recommendation C, to agree the council pays Suez an additional 3 million this financial year and further payments until the end of the contract as set out in the confidential annex. To delegate authority to that of legal services to draw up and complete the legal documents to bring to effect this decision, and to make changes within the contract to deal with the unforeseen circumstances in clinical waste collection service, and to obtain, by increasing the liability cap with the contract, to delegate authority to the chief executive to sign the final contract variation. Okay, so that's proposed Councillor Dixie Darge, seconded by Councillor Liz Lyshon. May I see those lead members in favour? Those lead members against? That's clearly carried. I believe we've now reached the end point. Just a few comments from me. We've obviously got a change in government, but we don't have a change in situation as of yet. We're still, as an administration, committed to doing everything we can to deliver for Somerset residents in these difficult times. And we've had some tough decisions before us today, and there will continue to be tough decisions before us in the weeks and months to come. And we'll continue to work hard on reducing our spending, and we won't shy away from making the difficult decisions that need to be made. I think the productivity plan that we agreed earlier outlines our commitment to efficiency improvements and tackling the obstacles that local government face, and we'll do everything in our power locally to be able to resolve those issues. But there still remains a fundamental national problem. The system of local government funding is broken, and particularly the position around social care needs significant national attention. I'm heartened to hear that there is talk of a commission on social care, but ultimately, until we get to a resolution on those issues, local government in all parts of the country will be in that very, very difficult situation that we and many other councils find ourselves in. I will be writing to the Prime Minister. I have already reached out to our seven new MPs. Sorry, which one did I forget? Yes. So our 6 new MPs and our 7 in total, to be able to discuss the urgency of this situation and to make sure that this is high on the new government's agenda, as well as working with the LGA, CCN and other council leaders. So I appreciate everybody's support. Thank you. Just a reminder that our next meeting is on Wednesday, July the 31st. And in a change to our usual programme, we will be in Frome at the town hall offices. So I look forward to seeing all or many of you there at the end of the month. Thank you very much.